Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! So this video is just a compilation of the first 5 episodes of my indie games inspired by Megami Tensei series, and I am just recording this as a quick forward. I'm gonna have some editor's notes in here to handle outdated information, but for now, please enjoy this lengthy look at over 25 games inspired by Persona or SMT or what have you. Let's get started. The first title is one that may already feel like I'm cheating, but it was also one of the main games that directly inspired me to make this video in the first place. But first, I need to make one thing very clear. I know basically nothing about Touhou. I'm not even sure if I'm saying it correctly, but my basic interpretation is that it's a shoot-'em-up series made by this guy called Zun, and then he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna sue you or anything, so make all the fan projects you want. And that's why there are also fighting games and a search action game from the team that made Synchronicity Prologue, and I don't know, maybe there's a golf game or something. I honestly haven't checked. But 2023 gave us the official release of Touhou Artificial Dream in Arcadia by Bar Holographic Otaku, which is one of the most directly SMT-inspired games I've ever played, particularly for fans of the first 2 titles in the series. The creator of the game, Potemki11, said on Twitter while working on the title that the game was absolutely supposed to be SMT. I want to make something like TPDP was to Pokemon, but for SMT, specifically old ones. And god did they succeed at that. The reason I want to emphasize my complete lack of knowledge about Touhou is because being a complete outsider to the series did absolutely nothing to detract from my enjoyment of this title. I'm sure die-hard Touhou fans can enjoy it on a level I couldn't, getting super excited and meme pointing at the screen when Bucket Girl here showed up, but even with minimal knowledge, I adore this title. You play as Sumireko and enter the world of Gensokyo through your dreams. The dream world is infested with these beings called sleepers, which from what I can tell are mostly, if not entirely, mute monstrous versions of iconic girls from Touhou Project. Thanks to your cell phone, Sumireko can capture and command these sleepers akin to demons from Megami Tensei, and you can summon up to 3 of them to aid you in battle. Instead of negotiating with them, since sleepers apparently can't talk, you can win them over by besting them in these little bullet hell minigames, which is a nice touch to the original series. From here, you can fuse sleepers together to get new ones, and try to fill out the database, which works similar to the many compendiums of Megami Tensei. The game has a third-person overworld that you can explore, but the dungeons utilize a first-person perspective. Most of the dungeons have unique mechanics, and it works well enough. Artificial Dream in Arcadia even has its own take on the classic Magnetite system, as keeping your sleeper summoned rapidly drains your battery like you're using a Google Pixel 7. Though you can eventually buy some upgrades from terminals, so it feels like you're making steady progress. While the game doesn't use the press turn system of many newer SMT games, it does utilize its own reward system for exploiting enemy weaknesses with the SP gauge, which you can fill up to perform special attacks or abilities. The graphics and music absolutely capture the vibes that they were going for perfectly, and it all comes together to create something worth experiencing. Honestly, if this game had been an actual SMT game made by Atlus, but all the Touhou girls were replaced with classic Megaten demons, it'd probably be among my favorites in the franchise. The creator really understood what made those old games work while incorporating modern ideas that don't make the game feel sluggish. If you like the SMT-style dungeon crawlers, and especially if you're a Touhou fan, you're gonna want to give this game a shot. And no, I still have no idea who my favorite Touhou girl is. Probably Yugi. Maybe Melee. Woodsalt is a game that took inspiration from Persona, but unfortunately one of the developers tried to highlight that fact in arguably not the best way. During an interview with PC Gamer, the developer told them, basically, I played Persona 4 Golden on my PS Vita, rest in peace lil buddy, and wanted to make a game similar minus all the grindy nonsense. So if you like Persona, then you'll like this. That quote led to PC Gamer posting the article on Twitter with the tweet, Woodsalt is inspired by Persona, but without the grindy nonsense. And that tweet ended up causing such a, in PC Gamer's words, significant negative backlash that they updated the article to address it and included an apology from the developer. I'll admit that probably wasn't the best way to try and sell people on your Persona-inspired game, but on the other hand, if it wasn't for that significant negative backlash, I probably never would have even heard about the game, so I guess it worked out? But okay, that's what makes it eligible for this video, but what is Woodsalt from Team Woodsalt? Well, you play as MC, and if you think I'm gonna let it slide that the main character is named MC, you've got another thing coming, buckaroos and buckarettes. Anyway, MC awakens from cryosleep after about 1,000 years and has to adjust to life on New Terra after a vague cataclysm seemingly wiped out most of Earth, though some of the dialogue implies this may have been an SMT-style demonic apocalypse. Unlike a lot of other sci-fi stories about characters getting thawed out in space, New Terra is not some desolate wasteland that you have to help rebuild. Honestly, it's already a pretty thriving community with its own government, agriculture, and even barbecue restaurants. It's a place where people have built lives, started families, and for many people, New Terra is the only home they've ever known. MC's adjustment is made a bit easier because he was thought out by his younger sister, who is now actually older than him, and gives him a place to stay and helps introduce him to people who can show him around. The main plot of Woodsalt basically asks if you think it'd be better for humanity to return to Earth and try to rebuild what was once lost, or stay here on New Terra to continue to build upon where humanity is now. Two of the main characters, Plyler and Zoe, act sort of like alignment representatives for these ideologies, but you'll have the opportunity to get to know other characters that have their own views about these ideas. As the plot progresses, you'll learn a lot more about what's going on, and the game even tries to create these deeper supernatural elements by forcing MC to have these creepy visions, and this one guy named Neil who just seems to be the guy who knows he's in a video game. In fact, that's kinda where the Persona inspiration comes into play. Throughout the days, you have free time, and you can use that time to get closer to the characters of your choosing in a system intentionally reminiscent of social links. Unfortunately, there's no way to check how far you are into a character's story, and the main plot branches so much based on your choices that it's hard to tell what dialogue options actually affected things. I've never wanted more for a game to have some sort of flowchart to keep track of what story path I'm on, or how far I've progressed with specific characters. And on top of that, the game constantly auto-saves with no manual save options, so you can't even just go back a day and try different dialogue choices. I remember on my first playthrough, I managed to get my favorite character killed, so it's worth a second playthrough to try and see what you might be able to do differently. Many people commented on the fact that a Persona-inspired game without the RPG mechanics is basically just a glorified visual novel, which isn't entirely untrue. In fact, this is the only game I'm going to be talking about today that doesn't have any form of RPG battle mechanics, which I think is worth discussing in and of itself. I've always believed that the Megami Tensei franchise could work with any genre, and I do like seeing Atlus explore different avenues for their games, whether it's the Persona fighting games or giving the Jack Bros a search-action tie-in game for Strange Journey Redux. Likewise, it's nice to see indie developers realize that you can take inspiration from Megami Tensei to create a title in a genre that Atlus doesn't really focus on. Overall, Woodsalt is a perfectly alright game, but I'll admit I probably wouldn't have given it much of a second glance if not for that original Persona comparison that put the game in such hot water to begin with. However, with its engaging world, surprisingly solid supporting cast, and mildly unsettling supernatural elements, Woodsalt does manage to tell a pretty interesting story, without any of that grindy nonsense. Back in 2020, I started following a game developer on Twitter because of a single tweet that said, among other things, I am developing hashtag hack and slash plus hashtag dating sim game inspired by hashtag Persona 3 hashtag Persona 5. Dating sim? Inspired by Persona 3 and 5 and not 4 apparently? Sign me right up. I even showed my early support with a very sincere, looking solid, and like, a little sign of the horns drawn out with text, because I'm cool like that. Despite following the developer on Twitter, little did I realize that a couple years later, I'd be blown away by a trailer in the Sony State of Play from not E3 2022 for a game called Eternights. And guess what, everyone? That game that I thought was looking solid in 2020 and that State of Play game from 2022 were the same game. I mean, that shouldn't surprise you, because otherwise this would have been a really random and needless tangent on my part. But yes, Eternights comes from Studio Sai, and was first teased back in 2020 before eventually getting a pretty big release in 2023. Not only did the game wind up appearing in the State of Play, but it ended up getting a physical release, and this Persona-inspired game ended up getting a pretty noteworthy cast, including multiple actors from the Persona series, like Xanthi Huynh, who plays Haru, and Alex Lee and Alejandro Saab, who are the new voices of Makoto Yuki and Akihiko Sanada, respectively. So, Eternights is the story about a total loser and his comic relief sidekick trying to get lucky on dating apps. Through some sheer luck, you get a match, but before you can meet up for your yacht date, side effects of a drug called Eternite seem to break out across the globe, transforming countless citizens into body horror monstrosities. Fortunately, your would-be date was a cosmic entity who grants you superpowers via a, magical transforming goopy arm. Eventually, you and your buddy team up with a pop star and a hologram lady and set up a base on a train, trying to bypass walls set up by the main villain to stop us from reaching our goal. Once you get past the intro and actually get onto the train, it's pretty easy to see where a lot of the Persona inspirations come into play. The game has a calendar system where you can perform one task during the day and one at night, and you only have so many days to accomplish your current objective, so there's a sense of time management. And a lot of the tasks are similar enough to Persona, like raising some of your stats, spending time with party members, or choosing to explore the current dungeon. The battle system is all action-based, but you won't be able to just button mash your way to victory, as you'll need to perfect timed dodges to slow down time, avoid damage, and fill up your special meter to use elemental attacks. You can perform these special attacks by succeeding in a QuickTime event, mashing the button a lot, and then succeeding in another QuickTime event. I will confess I screwed this up more than once by not realizing the mashing part had ended. But the main bread and butter of Eternights is that unlike Persona, there's a lot more emphasis on building romantic relationships with these characters. You can date the girl or guy of your dreams, but if you want to be right, you'll date Best Girl Min. She's my favorite. Truthfully, the game looks great, and all the characters are pretty well designed. Well, I'd say except the protagonist. I know games like this often want to have an everyman blank slate type character, but I think he's a little too boring looking. Like a logo or something on that Hanes white t-shirt would have been nice. Give him like Krillin's taco shirt or something. The main thing I could see people disliking about Eternights is its focus on comedy. Trying to have a sense of levity in a serious situation can be difficult writing-wise, and Eternights definitely stumbles with this every now and then. While I did laugh quite a few times, I often found myself groaning just as often. I know comedy is a very subjective thing, so I'm not trying to say the game isn't funny, but the jokes it goes for aren't always my cup of tea. For example, one of the first things that happens after your character awakens to his powers and his friend thinks he might be dying is to start talking about the time they stole porn from his grandpa. The game has quite a few instances of this type of tonal dissonance, but like I said, comedy is subjective, so maybe it'll be the funniest thing you ever did see. While the writing isn't always my favorite, I do think Eternights is absolutely stellar in a lot of other ways, and it's honestly impressive to see how big this little project grew over the years. I know Studio Sai has started expanding and is already working on future titles, so I'm excited to see what they deliver in the future, and hey, if they stick with the Persona inspirations, maybe I'll revisit them down the road. Heck, there was a cut character from Eternights named Yuria, so if they wanted, they could do the most Persona thing imaginable and release Eternights Overflow to introduce her as their version of the Atlas Girl archetype. Next up is Advent Crossroad from Nankata Games that came out back in 2021, and much like Artificial Dream in Arcadia, this is a great title for those looking to scratch that Megami Tensei dungeon crawler itch. Nankata has made several tweets promoting the game that just straight up use the SMT hashtag, and the official YouTube trailer says that it's an SMT-inspired DRPG. In Advent Crossroad, you play as a mall security guard, whom I named K-Bean because I have no imagination, and things start out pretty normal. You go stop a dispute at a clothing store where a guy was interested in cross-dressing, you investigate a suspicious package left in the women's bathroom, you team up with a government agent and use these mysterious devices called tabernacles to fight off the hordes of powerful monsters that started attacking and eating people. Oh, and you stop by the bakery to get one of those pizza pretzels, because if you've ever had them, they're really good. I'll admit right off the bat that Advent Crossroad appeals to me because I am a huge fan of malls as settings for stuff like this, especially when it comes to video games. From Sector Culina in Strange Journey to the Galaxy Galleria Mall in Space Quest 4, and even the mall from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, I like malls, and this is a pretty fun one. Even though the mall in Advent Crossroad is completely sealed off, and the liminal spaces between the main wings have all warped into these winding dungeons that even feature more powerful super monsters like those found in Etrian Odyssey. One of the main mechanics in Advent Crossroad is the scan system, where if certain monsters use specific abilities while your scan is active, your characters can learn the abilities for themselves. It's a pretty nice mechanic that lends itself to the Megaten inspiration. You don't get to recruit the monsters themselves, but every character being able to learn and use their abilities feels pretty good. You can also earn TP through battles and download new skills through your tabernacle and swap learned skills in and out to best suit a situation like in Digital Devil Saga. It's a good system that's fair and rewarding and can make for some interesting fights. And honestly, the combat in general has a lot more going for it than you might initially expect. Like in Persona 3, you've got 3 types of physical damage, but something that's cool is that you can often use context clues to your advantage, like flying enemies generally being weak against bows and guns. There are a lot of elemental attacks, and they can almost all cause different ailments, and that's not including the wide range of other ailment skills on top of that. The mechanics may look a bit basic at first, but it feels really good when you can get into the groove of it. As you make your way through the dungeons, you unlock different areas of the mall, and fortunately this mall has plenty of weapon and armor shops, and even with monsters ripping people apart and eating faces, all the employees still gotta earn that bread. You stumble upon more characters with access to tabernacles and try to learn the deep hidden secret behind this mall and where these monsters are coming from. You find out that not everybody who has one of these devices is using them for good either. While the dialogue isn't always the most compelling, and I caught a few minor grammatical errors here and there, the story did do a nice job of keeping me invested. The artwork for the characters is solid and the designs are okay, but I'll admit that none of the main cast really stands out to me that much. For example, this girl here is one of the main party members, but when I first saw her, nothing about her made her really stand out to me from most of the generic NPCs. I do really like how the protagonist always looks like he's half asleep, but it's also sort of a shame that his employers neglected to give him his security guard hat. He could have had some fun Raido Kuzunoha vibes, and having a distinct badge on his hat would have been a cool physical reminder of his connection to the mall that we're trying so hard to escape. That said, I do like a lot of the monster designs, and it's pretty exciting not knowing what you're gonna run into next. You start out fighting goblins and wolf-like creatures, but before too long, you're taking down monstrous killer pie slices. If you're a fan of first-person dungeon crawlers, this is one you may want to check out. And if you wind up really liking it, the developer also released another game in the Cross series called Core Crossing. I don't have as much to say about that one for this video because I haven't played as much of it, and also that one seems to lean much more heavily on the Etrian Odyssey side of its inspiration rather than Megami Tensei. Nunkata was working on a third game that's supposed to be closer to Devil Summoner, and that may still be happening, but supposedly they're working with a publisher now, so I'll have to keep an eye out for future titles and see where things wind up with this series. And to wrap up this video, let's talk about the big one. The one that if I didn't talk about it, practically every comment would be telling me that I forgot to talk about it, but first, a quick note about this game. That's right, it's Undertale, the breakout indie hit of 2015. I knew I'd have to talk about this game, but truthfully, I'm not even really sure what I should say about it in this video. Does anybody watching right now really not already know about Undertale? Even though the game is nearly a decade old, I still think this is one of those games where anybody interested in it should just check it out for themselves. You play as a small child who winds up in the underground beneath a mountain in a land where monsters rule. From there, you explore and encounter a variety of characters and choose whether to befriend them, brutally murder them, or a mix of both. It's really up to you. One of the most famous aspects of Undertale is that the game typically remembers your choices, so the option of just reloading a past save and trying to undo the outcome may find you met with completely different dialogue. Instead of purely menu-driven based combat like a lot of RPGs, Undertale has you control your character through this little heart-shaped cursor, and you have to physically move it around to dodge what enemies throw at you, sometimes in a very literal sense. Though sometimes you do want to grab what they throw at you, because it's a whole thing, but I promise it makes sense. While you can just fight your way through the game, you may also choose to try out different tactics, like laughing at an insecure comedian's jokes, or just helping a little fellow achieve some alone time. The enemies in Undertale all feel like they have distinct personalities and lives beyond just existing to kill people, which makes perfect sense when you hear how Toby Fox was inspired by SMT when creating the title. In a 2013 interview with The Escapist, back when Undertale was still in development, Toby Fox said, "The inspiration for the talking system came from Shin Megami Tensei. I feel that it's important to make every monster feel like an individual. If you think about it, basically all monsters in RPGs like Final Fantasy are the same, save for the graphics. They attack you, you heal, you attack them, they die. There's no meaning to that." In a later interview with Nintendo, Fox reiterated this inspiration by saying, "The Act and Mercy commands were inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. I played just a bit of that game and loved talking to the monsters in it. Since I liked it so much, I decided I wanted to make a game where that was actually the main focus." While Undertale is widely considered a modern classic, I will admit I personally have mixed feelings about it. I'm not a huge fan of how the game looks, and there are certain beloved characters that I find pretty annoying. However, I do think it's more than worthy of a lot of the love and attention that it's received over the years, with it appearing in Smash Bros. And even going on to inspire a lot of other indie games. Which, if an indie game is inspired by Undertale, does that mean that game is also indirectly inspired by Megami Tensei? Funny enough, Toby Fox has said that another inspiration for Undertale's combat was bullet hell shooters like Touhou Project. So we started this list with a Touhou Project fan game inspired by Shin Megami Tensei, and ended it with a game inspired by both Shin Megami Tensei and Touhou Project. Really makes you think, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. And yes, I know Deltarune is also a thing, but like I said, I'm trying to only look at finished titles with this video. So, the first game I want to talk about is one that I immediately went into with very high hopes for one specific reason. See, on my spreadsheet of Megami Tensei-inspired indie games, I always mark down how the game highlights where it took inspiration from. Normally, this is something like a tweet from the developer said they were inspired by SMT, or a Kickstarter blurb mentions Persona. But the Steam page for Lotus Reverie First Nexus from Keinart Lobre actually compares itself to Devil Survivor of all things, and I love those games. I mean, yeah, it mentions Persona 2, but come on, Devil Survivor. And it's actually really easy to understand and see how this game uses that specific series to build itself, from both a narrative and mechanical perspective. You play as... Look, I don't actually know, but I pronounced it as Sink, an amnesiac young woman in a black cloak who stumbles upon a castle with 6 other survivors living in it. After a horrible incident known only as the incident, billions of people were wiped off the face of the earth. However, only half of the handful of remaining survivors are actually human, with the other half being the linked partner of a surviving person known as a tulpa, who have their own personalities and are indistinguishable from a human being. If a human dies, so does their tulpa, and vice versa. But tulpas are immortal outside of having an incredibly short lifespan, and the only way to extend that lifespan is to challenge another tulpa host pair to a duel and kill them. These rules are mostly explained to the player via a giant black monolith in the middle of the city, because Lotus Reverie is essentially a death game at its core. However, and I'll acknowledge this is purely my own personal bias, there's no fun death game mascot character to enforce the rules or go to the players, and that's something I always really like seeing, so I am a bit sad this game doesn't have that. The rules state that the game will end when there's only one pair left, So as cheery as the characters try to act toward one another, they all know they eventually have to fight, and the game basically states they already have several times before Sync even showed up. Players can spend time around the castle in a system that is very similar to Devil Survivor. You have main story events that you eventually have to do, and side story events that allow you to grow closer to some of these characters. By the way, I recommend saving before doing any main events in this game, because sometimes you'll need to make choices. But it's not really in the this choice will affect the plot sort of way, it's more in the anything other than the right choice means you immediately die sort of way. So yeah, save your game. And regarding those side events, I have to admit, for a good while, I really didn't want to do any of them. Because at the start of this game, I did not like any of these characters. And it wasn't in the Danganronpa way, where their faults and negative traits did a mostly good job of building tension. I just thought they were kind of annoying. However, those of you that are paying attention will notice I said I didn't like them at the start of the game. Lotus Reverie is absolutely a slow burn type of title. I spent the first several hours of this game just feeling utterly exhausted by every single character just trying to out-quirk each other, as if the quirk gods would declare one of them as the one true Quirkules. But I can say it does pick up. Unfortunately, that slow burn, overly quirky stuff is mostly what I'm showing you all here, because once the main story gets going and you start figuring out which characters are human and which are tulpas, and especially as you learn more about Sync and her partner and start having duels against the other pairs, yeah, it's engaging stuff, and I legitimately don't want to spoil any of it here. While certain scenes can feel like they drag on, especially when they're trying to be funny, the game does take its main premise seriously enough. I was actually pretty surprised that in the heat of the moment, I found myself really caring about a character that 20 minutes ago I was saying, "Shut up, just shut up, I hate you two," while rolling my eyes and mashing the A button. But speaking of those duels, let me try and describe the combat in this game as nicely as I can. It's stupid and I hate it. It may try to lure you in by claiming to be a traditional SRPG, but it's this weird system where you have to plan out your move ahead of time and set the character's AI regarding different opponents to specific patterns, and everybody moves at the same time, so depending on the set AI, you may actually move where you didn't want to, and look, simply put, it's just not that fun. Now look, I want to be clear, I do not dislike this combat because I dislike strategy RPGs. Quite the opposite, actually. Final Fantasy Tactics, in my top 5 favorite video games of all time. Devil Survivor Overclocked, my second favorite Megaten game. Fire Emblem Three Houses and Triangle Strategy, my #1 game of the year for 2019 and 2022 respectively. Demonschool, a Megami Tensei inspired SRPG launching next month, been one of my most anticipated titles for several years. Jeanne d'Arc? I don't have a single sweeping statement for this one, it's just really good, and available on modern PlayStation consoles now, and more of you should play it. The point is, I like SRPGs, and for the most part, Lotus Reverie First Nexus ain't that. The combat is just frustrating, and it's not very fun, and it never feels all that rewarding. And I think perhaps even the developer knew all that, because the game asks you multiple times if you want to just turn the combat off entirely and just not do it, as the game lets you choose between battle mode, where you do the fights, a novel mode, where they just describe the fight in the visual novel style the rest of the game has, and a mixed mode, which is just both, for those that don't want to miss anything. The only downside to turning off the combat is that you can miss out on some of the trophies and achievements, but I'm playing the Switch version, so I don't even think that actually matters for me. Oh yeah, this game is available on most consoles, which is pretty cool. I know a lot of the games I cover in these videos are only on PC. Alright, so let's quickly recap. The story takes a while to get going, and the combat is unsubtly unfun, So do I recommend Lotus Reverie First Nexus? I honestly do. The general premise and sense of intrigue once the story gets going is legitimately compelling, and I was really excited to see where it goes and how it ends up. The mystery alone of trying to guess who's a tulpa and who isn't makes it particularly engaging. But one last thing I feel I should clarify is that First Nexus subtitle, because this game does end pretty openly. Don't get me wrong, you get closure on some stuff, but there's clearly more planned for the Lotus Reverie world. The only real word on Second Nexus I was able to find was through a Patreon post from the developer mentioning it that was dated only a few months after the launch of the first game. As of right now, over 3 years later, there doesn't seem to be a Steam page or much indicating that Second Nexus is still happening. If it does, I'll absolutely pick it up and maybe even talk about it on a future entry in the series. Hopefully it'll have better combat. Next up is Dark Blood Chronicles from Homage and Blossomsoft, which technically came out in December of 2013, but according to the dev, it was only available for about a month before it got pulled. The game came back with a Kickstarter page in 2014 that described it as an old-school RPG inspired by Persona, Parasite Eve, Shadow Hearts, and Clock Tower. The point of this Kickstarter was just to help fund visual improvements to an already finished project, but it only raised $369 out of a roughly $11,000 goal before being cancelled. However, the fully finished and visually enhanced version of the game did eventually come out in November of 2017 and is available on Steam, which is the version I'm playing for this video. You play as Samantha, a young girl who goes to school one day only to find it totally abandoned and filled with monsters. With the help of her friend Ethan, the two fight their way through the school, solve a weird series of statue puzzles that seems really out of place for a high school setting, and eventually get sent to the Dark Realm by one of their classmates, a girl named Sin. Once in the Dark Realm, the two teens get separated, and Sam finds herself on a vague hero's journey to accept the power of warrior souls based on the Zodiac, and eventually take down an evil entity and presumably save the Dark Realm. The Kickstarter mentions a Persona comparison, but I think this title is much closer in scope to Shin Megami Tensei, especially SMT-if, with the narrative themes of having a classmate send you from a school setting to a dark demon-infested realm. Except for, oh yeah, the part where Sam can straight up summon a persona, like they actually call it a persona. Aside from Samantha and Ethan, you also have Eon, a mysterious woman inhabiting the Dark Realm that Sam meets shortly after arriving. Even though you only have these three party members, a minor complaint that I have is you never have all three characters together until pretty late into the game. But a feature that I love is the Monster Tome, which allows you to have a fourth party member in the form of a familiar, and this is essentially the game's version of demon collecting. Most of these monsters have static movesets and equipment, and a kind of annoying thing where none of them can attack. They all just have to use a skill to do it, but there is a lot of variety here. Some of the familiars you get from finding them in different dungeons or encountering them on the overworld map. Others you may get from leveling up one familiar until it kind of basically evolves, but an aspect I really like is that you don't lose access to the old one when this happens. And then there's one familiar you get just from buying the game on Steam and booting up a new file. Creator of the game just flat out gives it to you.
Thank you, I deserve this.
Because there are so many different familiars in the game, you're definitely likely to find one that you like, whether it's for their design, or their moveset, or whatever. I know this Minotaur saved my butt more than once, and kinda spoiler warning I guess, but you can even unlock Sin herself if you want someone with a bit more narrative weight. Obviously, these familiars don't have as much personality as your main party members. Heck, they don't even really have any battle animations or victory poses like your main cast, but you'll probably find yourself attached to them all the same. I know I did, and I really did enjoy this system. As far as the actual combat goes, it's fine. It's pretty standard, all things considered. You have normal attacks, and then you have like techniques and abilities. It does do this one thing I'm not a huge fan of, where it separates your skills into different menus, but it's never like, oh, one menu is physical attacks and one is magic attacks, and I'll admit sometimes I just had trouble remembering which menu certain skills were under. The game uses an ATB system, except battles freeze on your turn anyway, which I think actually defeats the point of an ATB system. It's more of a get really annoyed and frustrated when every single enemy gets a turn right before your bar finishes filling up system. Like, look, I don't hate ATB combat, but I think Darkblood Chronicles misses the mark on what makes that style work, and it should have either gone all the way to do it right, or just stick with regular turns. Like I want to be clear, it's not bad or anything, it's just not doing it any favors. One part of the combat that I do really like is Sam's soul system. You can equip different souls in order to learn new moves by acquiring special points after battles. You can only use the moves associated with a soul when you have it on Sam, but once you max it out, you can visit a fortune teller who will lock the skills onto you, so you can use them even if you put on a different soul. However, you can only do that with 3 mastered souls at a time. Basically, this allows for a lot of customization option for Sam's moveset, and since the souls can also affect her elemental weaknesses or resistances, it's a good idea to think hard about which ones you want to keep on, and which skills you want unlocked through the fortune teller. By the way, I recommend always having some healing spells on Sam, because some of the enemies in this game hit like a truck. Visually speaking, Darkblood Chronicles has this distinct style that, I'll admit, tickles a certain pleasure area of my brain. It's like a blend of Top Cow comics with Gaia Online. All 3 of the main characters are visually distinct, and most of the familiars are unique enough that, again, I'm sure you can find one that you love for their design. I do wish that the characters had facial portraits when they speak. It seems really weird to me that they don't, since they do all have character art, and the screenshots of the old version of the game from that Kickstarter I mentioned has portraits. Regarding the world, though, I found nearly all the locations have a nice dark horror vibe, whether it's underground catacombs, or creepy churches, or war-torn battlefields. Even the main town has this gothic aesthetic that I really enjoyed. Honestly, with how much many of the areas in the Dark Realm are fleshed out, one of my biggest complaints is that all of the battles take place in this empty grid void. It feels less gothic horror and more Mega Man Battle Network. Almost every dungeon in the game has different types of puzzles, and most of these are perfectly fine. But toward the end of the game, they do start going with some of my least favorite dungeon tropes in games, like pitfalls and teleporters, so yeah, some of them got a bit old for me after a while. The music in this game is pretty great, with a lot of ambient tracks mixed with some good rock music. Honestly, I was a huge fan of the overworld theme, which made looking for secrets a lot more enjoyable. And also, there's this fun little guitar riff whenever you get pulled into a battle. Darkblood Chronicles has multiple endings depending on your dialogue choices and how much your party members actually like you. While the game is decently long, which may have you wondering whether or not you'd want to play through it again to see any of the other endings, I found out that with enough patience, money for items, and a bit of saving and reloading, you can see all 5 endings without needing to beat the entire game again, so that's pretty cool. Overall, I found myself enjoying Darkblood Chronicles. It provides a good sense of world building, and the characters, while nothing too special, help keep the plot moving, and it's fun to learn about the rules of this realm and what your actions are building toward alongside Sam herself. The game is only $10, and I think it offers more than enough to make it worth the price of admission. Exodus Checkmate is a game that comes to us from Brazilian studio Ninja de Lua. It was released episodically, with the first chapter coming out in August 2022, and the final chapter launching quite recently in June of 2024. As stated in many tweets from the developer themselves, the game takes inspiration from Shin Megami Tensei, Persona, and also Mary Skelter for any fans of that particular series. I've never played it myself. Perhaps what I found the most surprising and intriguing about Exodus Checkmate is that instead of taking inspiration from the social elements of Personas 3, 4, or 5, they actually claim Persona 1 as the main inspiration, and I could definitely see that, and not just because it's a first-person dungeon crawler. The game takes place in a sealed-off school, and all of the dungeons are these pocket dimensions called game boards that you can access through rifts that open up in the school. Every world has a ruler that you need to defeat, and it reminds me a lot of the Snow Queen quest, which is one of my favorite Persona stories. You play as Ray, who is sleeping in class one day and is bestowed upon the Black King. You quickly team up with Quinn, who has the Queen piece, and as you continue to work your way through the game, you'll unlock other girls who each take the form of a specific chess piece. And before you ask, yes, because this is a game where you're the lone guy in a party full of distinct and unique hotties, of course there are some social mechanics, affection events throughout the dungeon, and romance options for your favorite girl. I like Sheila. She's tiny and snarky, and her being the pawn piece makes her feel like the underdog, but hey, you choose whichever girl you like best. But just so you know, apparently a lot of folks agree with me that she's the best, because even the dev told me that like half the people he's talked to love Sheila. I already mentioned that you visit these game boards through rifts called gates, and they all have their own themes, puzzles, and things to discover. While your initial goal is to learn who the king of each board is and defeat them, you can always revisit the worlds to unlock new events or find secrets. Battles, like the dungeons, are all first person, and this game has a pretty interesting take on magic and skills. There's no MP or SP in this game, but every spell has a cooldown period. So if you use Quinn's fire spell, you'll have to wait 2 turns before you can use it again. However, Exodus Checkmate has its own ideas for the classic Megami Tensei advantage system. Hitting an enemy with a spell they're weak against will lower the cooldown period, but hitting them with something they repel or drain will lengthen it. Of course, even things like healing spells have a cooldown period, so I'm going to give this game credit for being an RPG where I actually got a lot more use out of items than I usually do. You've also got super powerful check moves that you can activate after filling up this gauge, and these are usually really powerful attacks, good healing spells, buffs, and other helpful abilities. Now, regarding the visuals, I love the visuals in this game. I adore these character designs and the artwork. Like, all of the party members look great. The antagonists all have distinct designs, and even the monsters are fantastic, with some very fun and memorable takes on mythological figures that would look right at home in a Megaten game. Even the minimap is vibrant and has that Danganronpa blood pink that makes it pop in a way that really works, and the game's UI has a lot of visual flair that I can't help but appreciate. A common problem I have with a lot of first-person dungeon crawlers is they just have this issue where a lot of the dungeons feel too samey. But Exodus Checkmate doesn't really have that problem as you explore lush jungles, skeleton-filled prisons, the inner workings of a computer. Because each game board comes from the thoughts and feelings of the king who rules it, there are plenty of distinct regions to encounter as you work your way through the game's 5 chapters. Now, I will admit there are a couple of small issues here and there. For example, the game was originally in Portuguese, so if you're playing the English version, you will encounter a fair amount of typos and grammatical errors, and in some cases, a few lines that just didn't get translated at all, but you can still usually piece together what's going on well enough. There are also some issues with the minimap where it doesn't update as you explore, and will eventually just explode into fully mapped areas. So, admittedly, it can be a bit tough to figure out where you have or haven't already been. Though that issue kinda goes away on its own after the first few dungeons, it's admittedly a little bit bizarre. Either way, I recommend zooming the minimap out if you plan to even remotely keep track of where you're going. Overall though, I really liked Exodus Checkmate. It's a little rough in places, but the places where it shines are absolutely phenomenal, and I can't praise them enough. I really like the chess motif used throughout the game, and it does a good job making all the characters and their dungeon crawling designs feel really unique. The game does a nice job of characterizing the kings of the game boards, even the ones you may not spend a lot of time interacting with. With a unique cast of characters, fantastic art and use of color, and an engaging turn-based battle system, Exodus Checkmate is a game I can highly recommend and think is well worth checking out for yourself. It's only on itch.io right now and not on Steam or anything, but that shouldn't stop you from giving it a go and letting the developer know what you thought of it. It's a smaller studio, but I was really impressed with what they put out here. Now, bear with me, but the next game I want to talk about is Culina Hands in the Kitchen from Lakeview Interactive, which came out in 2016 after a successful Kickstarter campaign that described it as a visual novel/restaurant sim hybrid inspired by Persona 4 and Hot Dog Stand the Works. I'm playing the game on Steam, because even though one of the trailers said the game was coming to the Xbox One, I'm not sure that it ever actually did. Also, I don't own an Xbox One. In Culina, you play as a recent culinary school graduate, Chris Carlson, or as I named him, Ratatouille Moneybags. And would you believe that I already have something to complain about on the very first screen? The game says that it's Friday, February 17th, 2015, and devs? February 17th, 2015?
It was Tuesday.
I know that's a super nitpicky complaint, but it would have been such an easy detail to get right that I'm just kind of confused. Don't worry though, I'm sure I won't dwell on it too much. So as the Kickstarter description said, Culina is a blend of restaurant management and social sim. You'll need to go buy ingredients from a range of meats, vegetables, and spices, and then make recipes consisting of at least one ingredient, but a max of only one per category. This is a pretty fun system where you can customize and even name your dishes, as well as decide how much of a markup you're going to put on them. Toward the start of the game, your dishes are going to be super simplistic, like pork belly with salt and pepper, or a limited time only item that I put on the menu that I called just breadcrumbs. That'll be $10. Your early guests aren't looking to spend a lot of money, but you still need to turn a profit, and ingredients are stupid expensive in this world. $3.20 for a carrot? F*** you, Paul, I'm glad your ex who runs the spice shop broke up with you. $4.96 for a single bulb of garlic? F*** you, Lisa, I'm glad you broke up with Paul. Wait. Besides those two lovable characters, you've also got Claire, the short stack who runs the butcher shop, Katie, the head server at your restaurant, and lastly, I'm excited to let you all know that this game features Dante! Not from the Devil May Cry series or anything, it's just a guy named Dante. While each day has multiple time periods, you can only hang out with one person per day in a social link-esque system. Because of this limitation, it is legitimately impossible to max out everyone's links in a single go. So you're gonna just want to focus on 2 or 3 characters in a given run, and probably only emphasize one character to actually try to max out. However, it's not a bad idea to get closer to the shopkeepers, as they do offer discounts on ingredients at certain levels of friendliness. But I guess the main question to ask is, are these social links any good? How do I feel about these characters? Truthfully, most of them range from fine to pretty solid. Dante is stoic, so it's nice seeing him open up a bit. Claire is super flirtatious, and she's got moxie. And Paul is constantly sleepy. #relatable. Honestly, I think the worst character in the entire game is actually the protagonist. He's pissy, he's childish, and he's even pretty mean-spirited at times. I specifically went for the platonic route with Claire because the protagonist constantly compares her to his ex, and frankly, I think Claire deserves better than the guy we're playing as. Oh yeah, and you can also hang out with your ex, but like, I didn't, because why would I do that? So, I don't have any footage of that. At the end of each week, you're required to have a certain amount of money on hand, so as the game progresses and these thresholds get higher, you'll eventually need to focus on spending money to expand your restaurant seating capacity and advertisements to draw in more and different types of customers, on top of buying the world's most expensive artichokes. You can also spend time raising your unique cooking traits, like healthiness or creativity, but, you absolutely do not need to. Like, at all. I will admit I had a bit of trouble accomplishing some of these goals at first, and that was even using the Moneybags cheat at the start of the game. Even if you meet all the thresholds, you can still get what feels like a bad or unsatisfying ending by not growing close enough to any of the characters, on top of accomplishing the business objectives. The main goal at the end of Culina is to try and impress a food critic, and you've really got to bring your A game if you're gonna pull that off. But I want to impress the critic, because she's hot, and I kinda want to give her a smooch. By now, I can probably guess what some of you are asking. How the heck is this game anything like Persona? And truthfully, I think that's a fair question. In fact, one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk about Culina today was actually to try and make a point. While I can definitely see how Persona's calendar system, traits, deadlines, and social events were inspirations for many of the mechanics in this game, I think we can all agree that there are certain themes, elements, or ideas that we kind of expect from a game that claims to be inspired by Persona. And Culina Hands in the Kitchen, while by no means a bad game for it, just doesn't really have those. In my last video, I talked about Woodsalt, which was also primarily inspired by Persona in the form of its social mechanics. In fact, the devs actively bragged about that game's lack of RPG or battle mechanics. However, Woodsalt took place on a space colony over 1,000 years in the future after Earth was attacked by SMT-style demons, so I felt like it still had some semblance of that blend of mundane yet fanciful that I look for in this type of game. The closest I can really say that Culina comes to matching that type of energy is that Claire named her dog Garm after the Norse myth, and that much like in a real Persona game, the hottest character that I'm the most attracted to is not a viable romance option. Oh yeah, and after you beat the game for the first time, you unlock Culina: The Spirit of Cooking, which was a prequel game that came out before Hands in the Kitchen. This game shows off your protagonist while he's in culinary school, his friendship with Paul, and Paul's relationship with Lisa and stuff. It's a good little prequel story. However, this one doesn't have any restaurant management or social elements and is purely a visual novel, so I won't dwell on it too much as it doesn't really have that Persona inspiration. But once again, I have issues with the calendar. This one starts on Friday, August 9th, 2013, which is accurate. But the story jumps around and quickly stops making any sense, like skipping to Saturday the 18th, which was a Sunday, Tuesday, February 17th, 2015, which is correct, but if you'll recall, was the day that Hands in the Kitchen supposedly started, and then it shows the protagonist graduating on Thursday, February 17th, 2016, the 1-year anniversary of the start of Hands in the Kitchen, and also February 17th, 2016 was a Wednesday, and then it immediately jumps backwards in time to February 2nd, 2015, which was a Monday, even though this game says Thursday, and it follows up on events that we just saw happen in 2016, and I'm sorry, I know this is a long rant, but I seriously cannot imagine it would have been that hard to consult a calendar when putting this timeline together. However, you know what, I will say this, if Culina is actually dealing with restaurant management, social elements, and time paradoxes, I may have to rethink my doesn't have any themes or ideas I expect from a Persona-type story stance. I want to re-emphasize that I don't think Culina Hands in the Kitchen is a bad game. In fact, I think the game manages to do a pretty good job balancing the restaurant mechanics for those who don't usually like the monotony of a straight visual novel, without making that system too overbearing and fast-paced for those that prefer the straight visual novels. And for those of you that don't want a straight visual novel, you can date Dante if you want. It's a perfectly fine little experience with decent characters, good music, and a solid, albeit simplistic storyline. I may not find myself saying, oh man, if you like Persona 4, you're gonna love Culina Hands in the Kitchen. But if you like restaurant management games and think the social mechanics are a welcome addition to that, you might like it for what it is. I've honestly put way more hours than I initially expected into the game, and I've even beaten it a few times to try and see different character endings. Man, this game just made me wish that there was some sort of restaurant management game with social elements that did capture the sort of stuff we usually want from Persona. Like, how cool would that be? Like, if only something like that existed. If only. If only. I mean, if only someone would just make a game like that. Affogato, by Chinese developer BeFun Studio and published by Spiral Up Games, is exactly that. Okay, you run a coffee shop instead of a restaurant, but beyond that, it is everything I was hoping for. Look, I usually try not to give away too many of my thoughts too early in these sections, but let me just say this. Affogato came out just last year in summer of 2023, and if I'd known about this game and played it back then, not only would it have been in my top 10 games of the year, it probably would have been my number 1. No offense, Danger-esque the Rumisode Triungulate. The only thing is, I was debating for a bit if this game was actually eligible for this video. Sure, if you search around for Affogato and Persona, you're gonna find plenty of game journalism pieces making the comparison, or tweets talking about it, or even videos from other Megaten creators, but I wasn't able to find much from someone actually involved with the game making the comparison. Until I stumbled upon a Reddit Q&A from the publisher where they said, one of our inspirations were story-heavy games like Persona 5, and that's good enough for me. You play as the titular Affogato, not to be confused with the Italian dessert combining espresso and gelato, but rather a red-headed witch that...
不是红发，是品红。
Oh, sorry, my bad. A magenta-headed witch that opens up a coffee shop called Witchery with her demon partner, Mephisto. The game operates on a calendar system that's divided into 2 main time periods, and you can do specific things during each one. Maybe you want to run your coffee shop so you can earn some extra money and pay your rent on time. Maybe you want to go out and explore the city, find someone to talk to, and raise your relationship with them. Or raise one of your social stats so that you're able to form closer bonds with some of those characters. Or maybe you want to activate your witch senses and purge the inner demons from possessed people using the Distinct Spirits of the Tarot deck in a fun and engaging reverse tower defense game that's super good and incredibly rewarding. Like, seriously, this is fun. I like this. I've said time and time again that I believe Atlus could make a perfectly good Megami Tensei game out of any genre, so it's always really cool to me when I see these indie games try something we don't usually see from that franchise, whether it's tower defense, visual novel, or yes, even a restaurant management sim. You have limited resources at the start of each fight, so you need to choose your units carefully as they explore the board, but you also need to choose the order you deploy them in carefully, because each familiar in your tarot deck has specific abilities. Some can attack while others can't, others can help collect resources, and some will provide beneficial buffs like healing your units or boosting their defense. Affogato and Mephisto need to investigate peculiar happenings going on in the city which are usually related to demonic possession, like the first major character being a seemingly unpopular transfer student who used a demon's powers to become the most popular girl in school. You need to spend certain periods investigating different areas and hunting down the right information before you can take on the big bad demon in an engaging boss fight. Of course, you only have a finite amount of time to look into these events and take care of it all, but you also need to earn enough money to pay the rent on your shop, so there's a pretty nice balancing act when it comes to your time. At least in theory. See, you earn so much more money from combat than you do from running the shop that I personally didn't see much reason to use one of my precious time slots to open Witchery for the day. You do have a nice selection of customers that come into your shop, and it's cool to get to know them over the course of the game. One minor complaint I have is that early on, the game doesn't really warn you what will or won't take up your time. For example, one evening, I was all set to go take care of a story-related mission, but then I saw someone I knew and was like, okay, I'll see what they have to say. But that conversation automatically roped me into a social event that took up the rest of my evening. Then I tried to go take care of that mission again during the next time period, but when I finished it during the day, it basically skipped my evening time slot and took me straight to the night. Because you only have such a finite amount of time to do things, it was a little frustrating not knowing what would end up eating my available slots. But overall, yeah, I adored this game. The visual charm is a huge part of that. I love the performances of the Chinese actors. It made me feel all warm and fuzzy seeing all the different coffee drinks that you can make. I even enjoyed the simplistic minigame of actually making the drinks by dragging ingredients and using the machines. I like that you can dress Affogato in different outfits, and it even changes her dialogue portrait. Overall, I love the relaxing elements of the coffee shop, and just seeing all the different coffee options felt great. and it created this cozy experience that blended really nicely with the inner demon's frantic battle mechanics. So yeah, absolutely loved this game, highly recommend it if you haven't heard of it until now. Like I said before, I honestly wish I'd known about this game sooner. This was a really great time for me, and yeah, it doesn't hurt that most of the cast, much like Exodus Checkmate, is comprised of cute girls. And Dr. House for some reason. And I figured we may as well start with a game that I'd only heard about for the first time a few months ago, but some of you may recall that Keylocker, turn-based cyberpunk action, managed to be my number 2 most anticipated title from the summer showcase. There are some games that I see and immediately get Megaten vibes from them, even if I can't find any official source stating as such. Now, this doesn't mean I'm going to break the one main rule I have for this series, it just means that I took the chance to reach out to the developer, Munana, to simply ask if there was any intentional Megaten inspiration, to which she replied, yes, the game is inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. I'm a huge fan, so you'll see design details that are inspired here or there just because I played the SMT games so much. End quote. In Keylocker, you play as Bobo, a doppelganger living in a cyberpunk society on Saturn who is capable of creating music, which has been outlawed by the satellites because it can generate electricity, which they covet and withhold from the masses, creating a classist society. You actually start the game by breaking out of jail for your crimes and finding a jukebot named Rocket, who is, without hyperbole, the bestest and most wonderful little robot in the whole wide world. I would not kill or die for Rocket, because that would make them sad. I will, however, remember to drink water and take frequent breaks from editing this video for Rocket, because Rocket wants what is best for all of us. Throughout the game, you'll encounter other characters like Bobo's brother Dealer and his girlfriend Ivy, who is his girlfriend. They are dating, and he is her boyfriend, because Dealer and Ivy are dating, and Dealer loves Ivy, who is his girlfriend. It's very subtle, but I was able to deduce that they are indeed boyfriend and girlfriend who are dating, thanks to the game reminding you of that nearly every single time they talk to or about each other. Bobo also recruits a few other characters to her band, and it's always kind of exciting to see who you're gonna run into next, because you're never really sure. While Bobo, Rocket, and Dealer are our only main party members, you will occasionally get help from guest characters who are in the area, like these weird thumb-limbed garbage bag things. I have no idea what they are, but I love them. As a huge fan of both prog rock and techno music, the world and aesthetics of Keylocker really appeals to me. Like, you know those old Roger Dean album covers where you're just on some desert planet with a castle in the background, and there's like 3 moons, but there's also just a bald eagle for some reason? This is like a game that basically takes place on one of those worlds, but presented through gorgeous, colorful pixel art. You never know what you're going to run into next on this planet, and that's half the excitement. There are humanoid walruses, a T-Rex that reminds you to save your game, and just perfectly normal alpacas. They smell like fart. Don't care, would still pet. Whether you're escaping the slums of a cyberpunk city, or riding a magic carpet through the desert, or making bizarre and dangerous deals with genies, the game feels like a grand rock opera, and it's easy to get invested in wanting to use the power of music and rhythm-centric turn-based combat to take down the satellites who have built themselves up like Greek gods. Speaking of the combat, it's a very distinct blend of challenging but forgiving. The reaction window on some of these timed hits is so precise that I ended up whiffing a lot of attacks. Unlike something like Paper Mario though, Keylocker is much less forgiving with these missed inputs. Since successfully blocking a move nullifies all damage, you basically have to do it in order to avoid getting wiped out in just 2 or 3 hits. You can maybe bounce back from a few misses here and there, but there are times when it feels like the game demands perfection from you. But I don't really hate it for that, because few things feel more satisfying than pulling off a successful string of perfect hits and blocks back to back. And if you do end up eating it, the game allows you to retry battles on the spot, so like I said, it's pretty forgiving. Keylocker understands that there's a learning curve to these precise inputs, and it gives you a pretty good opportunity to practice with them. You can actually choose different classes for Bobo and the other characters that can determine if you're more offensive or defensive in combat, and the game boasts that your class actually changes the story, but I'm not sure how much it actually does outside of a few characters reacting differently to which class you are or aren't. At the end of most of the game's chapters, Bobo and her band perform in these Guitar Hero-esque rhythm sections, and I sucked at these. I'm already really bad at rhythm games, but they also use the Pro Controller's shoulder buttons, and my brain just could not remember which button correlated to which note. Keylocker definitely isn't a game for everyone. The world is incredibly bizarre, the combat asks a lot from you, and I know the dialogue won't be everybody's cup of tea, but I frankly enjoyed it for the most part. Some of the humor is a bit hit or miss for me, but I still enjoyed it more than the comedy found in a few other games I've played in these types of videos. Between Keylocker coming out in September and this video going up, Munana has already announced their next big title, Clowned King, which is Fire Emblem, but with clowns. While the Steam page for this latest project doesn't directly mention Megaten, the brief section at the end that talks about the developer states, Munana is a small indie game developer with a love for unique JRPGs and RPGs, such as the Devil Survivor Saga, Disgaea, Earthbound, the Shin Megami Tensei series, the Mario RPGs, and Off. So, I'll leave it up to y'all if you think that counts and I should revisit Clowned King on this show once it's out. I'm definitely gonna play it anyway, because it's Fire Emblem. With clowns. Alright, so this next game is actually going to serve as a little bit of a palate cleanser. This is a very short and simple game jam title that I found that was made by two brothers and originally put out in 2017. However, it was re-released onto itch.io about a year ago. And the name of this game is True Meteor Reincarnation. Yes, otherwise known as Shin Meteor Tensei. Although I guess if they wanted to be accurate, it would be Shin Ryusei Tensei, which would roughly translate as True Reincarnation of the Meteor. If the Shin Meteor Tensei title wasn't obvious enough, I will still take a moment to confirm that the game's page says that it's a first-person dungeon crawler inspired by Shin Megami Tensei. Now, the reason why I definitely want to hammer home that this is a game jam game is because it was probably made in a very short amount of time, and as such, may seem incredibly basic and simplistic in places. Your character wakes up in a mysterious military research lab that's overrun by demons, and your one objective is to try and prevent a meteor from presumably wiping out all life on Earth. Very quickly into your quest, you'll pick up a Pomp, which is an obvious allusion to Megaten's comps, and it only sounds absolutely ridiculous if you let yourself forget that Megami Tensei canonically has things called Gumps. It also comes with a Jamon summoning program, which I think is some kind of salty Spanish ham, or I don't know, maybe the monsters in this game are just called Hamons. The official game page does call them demons though, but I don't know, this dude looks like he might be made out of dry cured ham, what do you think? I actually really like the setting here, with the creepy military base giving me a lot of the 80s sci-fi horror vibes that I loved about Strange Journey. The one lone objective is simple enough to understand and works for what is supposed to be a short experience. As previously stated, you crawl through the dungeon, first-person style, and it even utilizes the SMT moon phases as you explore. Though if these phases actually affect anything, I couldn't tell you what. In battle, you have a sword and a gun, a magic option, the ability to talk to enemies, and a basic escape. You can find better weapons and armor by actually exploring each floor of the lab more thoroughly, and your character will just put everything on automatically, making it less equipment and more just general stat boosts. For example, armor doesn't really boost your defense, it just gives you more HP. While there are only a small handful of enemy types in the game, most of them will have at least one resistance and one weakness. For example, the Salty Ham Demon takes additional damage from gun attacks, and after a few gun upgrades, you'll knock him down with a single hit. But that brings us to the magic and talk options. Basically, you don't have any magic, much like the original SMT1 protagonist, so here's what you're gonna need to do. Recruit Carry Crutches over here as soon as possible. As far as I can tell, talking is just a flip of the coin whether it succeeds or fails, so you may need to try a few times before she joins you. Once you have her, using the magic option has her cast a simple healing spell on you, and trust me, you're gonna want this, as the only other way to restore your health is a single blue cube that you can find on each floor. After that, simply try to recruit one of whatever new Jamons you come across, as each floor usually introduces at least one new enemy type. Aside from the Ham Beast, you've also got a Sock Puppet, this superb owl, a straight-up Persona reference, and even Saki from Brazilian folklore, who was also in Exodus Checkmate. And remember to put that one Doofenshmirtz meme in here, John, and... wait. You'll notice that the more demons you recruit, the more damage your magic does, while your tiny Timantha, who did not die, will give you a small taste of healing each time. And then you just... win. You don't have MP, so there's nothing stopping you from spamming this, and the little girl is basically the only monster who resists magic damage. You can take down some of the other monsters a little faster by hitting their weaknesses, but you'll always want to regularly use magic to try and keep your HP replenished as you explore the later floors. I even beat the final boss by just spamming magic and keeping my health up. The entire game is only about 40 minutes long, and it's free to download, so I can't really give any reasons not to play it if it looks like something you'd like to check out. It's a bit simple and repetitive in places, but never to the point where it becomes unbearable, because, again, you're gonna get the full experience in less than an hour. I do wish the game had some music in it, or at least some better ambient sounds to try and sell the atmosphere, which, as a reminder, I do really like and am praising. I'll also admit that I really don't like how the map works in this game, as you'll constantly press the button to get a top-down view of only the general area around you, that also bases itself on the direction you're facing rather than a consistent bird's-eye view. A mini-map that updates in real time or a proper full map would have worked out a lot better. I don't know if the creators are watching this, or if they had any plans to eventually expand the idea, but I'd be down for seeing it more fleshed out. I like the vibes it has, it feels very Megaten-esque while still having its own sense of personal identity, the sprite work is pretty good, and yeah, I'd be down for seeing more. Add a little bit more narrative, fine-tune the combat, hire a composer, and give us a minimap, and I'd truly be down for this Meteor Reincarnation as a few hours long paid experience. Our next game is already a bit of a misnomer, because that implies that I'm only discussing a single game. Elohim Eternal from George Alexandros is the definition of an expansive universe. So let me start out with Elohim Eternal Prologue. Much like true Meteor Reincarnation, this is a relatively short free-to-play story. It came out on Steam in summer of 2022 and was our gaming introduction to this franchise. Prologue gives us a chance to meet our protagonist, Joshua, learn a bit about this world that combines ancient religions with science fiction, and get a taste for the combat, which is pretty darn good. I will touch more on this in a bit. Normally, when I discuss these Megami Tensei-inspired indies, I have to look to outside sources, but Prologue actually offers some behind-the-scenes information, with an in-game document stating, the Shin Megami Tensei series influenced Elohim Eternal's combat system, which relies heavily on taking advantage of enemy weaknesses. Other inspirations claimed are the Horizon Zero Dawn series and Xenogears, which I still have not played, sorry Bao. Joshua is a soldier on a trek to Mount Sinai when he meets a judge named Tovit, who lost so much, and this man teaches Joshua to let go of his anger at his father's death at the hands of the Keynights, asking him to focus on just loving those we've lost, rather than dedicating our lives to revenge. Tovit's story is a short one, but the prologue chapter makes us care about him, and does a good job introducing us to Joshua in a short amount of time. The prologue ends with Joshua meeting up with his uncle, Lamech, before the two reach Mount Sinai in the morning, which is where the game that this is a prologue to, Elohim Eternal: The Babel Code, begins. Now, one of the main things about this title that I could see turning some people off is that it throws a lot of terminology your way, and I'm secure enough to admit that some of it definitely went over my head, so sorry if some of this is a little wrong. Basically, my understanding is you have the Eternights and the Keynights. The Eternights are split into two groups, Jehudans and Atticans, who hate each other, but share a mutual contempt for the Keynights, who are these mostly mechanical cyborg humans who worship Ahix, a supposed world eater who stands in opposition of the Cosmocrators whom the Eternights worship. There are also the Shadim, which act as most of the enemies in this game, and are generally portrayed as beasts with some mechanical parts. There's a lot of religious-based lore that mostly comes from Judeo-Christian stories, but it also mixes in some Babylonian, Sumerian, and ancient Egyptian. The Babel Code does something that I do generally like seeing in RPGs, where each of the main party members comes from a different faction, and they all have their own perspectives on things, working together mostly out of necessity rather than a genuine interest in camaraderie. I already mentioned Joshua, who is a Jehudan soldier who wants to be a judge, but lost an arm early in the game after being ambushed by Keynights at Mount Sinai. There's also Bioz, a judge for the Atticans, who is actually treated as an outcast because his mother was a Jehudin, and Ruthia, a half-Cainite, half-alien who supposedly comes from the planet that the Eternights perceive as heaven. None of these characters start on the best of terms with one another, and I actually really liked seeing them grow closer and challenge their own belief systems throughout the course of the game. Despite Tovit's teachings, Joshua still has a lot to learn about letting go of his anger and mistrust. Honestly, the 3 party members are one of the best parts of this game, and I liked seeing them all change and develop as characters over the course of the story. The Elohim Eternal series actively wants and encourages you to interact with its world. As you explore, you'll find shrines, books, plaques, and other things to read, which often help explain some of the lore or terminology that you've been exposed to. One of my personal favorite things is that every area in the game has some of these little sparkles. Some are on the main path, while others require a bit of exploration, but collecting all of them in a zone results in you finding an artifact from that area that just gives you a little bit of history. I liked this. They also have these things called heart events that are... I don't really want to say they're like social events, they're more like... Remember those moments in Persona Q where you reach a dead end so the group decides to just chat for a bit? It's kinda more like that. Just fun little optional character moments where your party interacts with each other, and I personally really enjoyed these. Very few NPCs in this game just do the "Welcome to Corneria" thing, and nearly everybody you talk to has a lot to say, often leading to a back and forth conversation between the characters. While all of this may just sound like pointless fluff, you're almost always rewarded for interacting with it through items, money, or experience points, making it a worthwhile part of the game. Your mileage may vary on whether the amount of dialogue in this title is a good thing or a bad thing, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few moments where I found myself going, I get it, and hitting that A button a little more vigorously, but even I can respect and appreciate the level of detail and world building that went into the game, and attempting to make everyone you can interact with feel like something of an actual person rather than just a game character. While the plot generally takes itself pretty seriously, there are certainly a few moments where they slip in some humor, and it usually feels very organic and got me to crack a smile quite a few times. One of my favorite examples is when Joshua and Beoz have to explore the city and ask around about a bizarre prophet. And while they're comparing leads and hunting down information to try and find him, they basically have a, "Oh wait, isn't that him?" moment, and I liked that. The Babel Code presents players with an item called Story Mode that basically allows you to turn off the combat and experience the game purely as a narrative experience, but you may want to hold off on doing that because the combat is pretty awesome. Rather than attacking purely with weaponry, the gang all uses different elemental attacks that should all sound pretty familiar. Fire, ice, wind, electricity, earth, light, and dark. Each character can only naturally use a few of these, but you can craft Crystallos to use as accessories to increase every character's spell options. Most enemies have some weaknesses that you can either guess through trial and error or use a specific item to scan them. Whenever you exploit an enemy weakness, which you should do all the time whenever possible, because anything besides what they're weak against is on par with shooting spitballs at them, you have a chance to deal extra damage by getting a well-timed hit on this circle thingy. I'm actually not sure what to call this. Each character has different functions and stats, like Joshua can tank a lot of hits, but has the weakest magic, while Ruthia is a total glass cannon, who will be your main damage dealer, but also dies really easily. Aside from your basic elemental attacks, characters can also equip divinity spells that range from super powerful attacks, buffs, healing abilities, status ailments, and more. One mechanic I'll admit I really don't like is some enemies have this shield thing called an Aspida, which can only be broken by using a specific divinity spell. It just kinda serves to waste your time. It'd be fine for boss fights, but there are just encounters that have these. And speaking of that, I do have one minor complaint, and that's that I really wish this was one of those games that just fully healed you after each battle, because hear me out, there's not really any good reason for it not to. See, each dungeon has these tree things that fully heal you for free whenever you interact with them, and because there are no random encounters in this game, and enemies stay dead unless you specifically use those trees to request for them to respawn, you can just run back to the tree and heal after every fight instead of using your items, which is, at worst, a little tedious, and a step that the game could easily remove by just healing you at the end of combat. The world of Elohim Eternal asks for a fair amount of commitment from its players, but it also knows how to reward them for taking the time to engage with it. The story really explores the idea of faith and how our beliefs shape who we become, and how exploring new ideas can lead to better outcomes. Emphasis on can, because without spoiling too much, there are definitely parts of the story that are, to put it lightly, a bit of a downer. But I absolutely loved the Babel Code and look forward to the next game. George has actually promised a lot more in this universe, so I may even revisit it one day on the show. I may even revisit it right now because BAM! Elohim Eternal Exodus! Much like Prologue, this is a free-to-play story that takes place prior to the events of the Babel Code. Unlike Prologue, it's a totally new cast of characters, setting, and time period, taking place 1,000 years before the Babel Code with a much heavier emphasis on Egyptian folklore, settings, and characters. Instead of Joshua, we play as Mosh, the prince of the Misru who has Simru blood, who were basically the Eternights and Keynights before the Eternights and Keynights. After defying the Pharaoh's orders to execute some Simru slaves and abandoning his hot pregnant wife, Mosh, along with this edgelord demon guy and Zipporah, team up with the Archons, aka Egyptian gods, to try and topple the Demiurge, or false gods, hold over their land. Some of the stuff you see may be familiar if you've watched The Prince of Egypt, like the whole plagues and let my people go and stuff. Or, if you're just familiar with that story beyond the 1998 animated cinematic masterpiece. As is understandable from a free-to-play game, Exodus is a lot more straightforward and simplified than Babel Code. The story is mostly presented in this visual novel style with portraits rather than sprites, and there are no more towns or dungeons, instead relegating things to these separated maps where you can specifically walk over to chests, enemies, or NPCs. Now, full disclosure, Exodus isn't actually out yet, but it's expected to get a full release in early 2025. In fact, last I checked, it should be out sometime in January. When George heard I was talking about Elohim Eternal for this video, he sent me a code for this latest title, and I'm happy to include it in my thoughts for this series. I honestly love the Egyptian setting, it's something I think Megaten usually drops the ball on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it. Battles are also a bit more simplified in Exodus, with Mosh primarily using physical skills, Haran using all the magic elementals, and Zippity Doo-Dah covering healing and support. You can still scan for enemy weaknesses, but I was a bit surprised that Exodus removes the combo system from Babel Code and Prologue, which makes Haran feel slightly less useful. Seeing as how Exodus is going to be a free-to-play experience, and it's still a good 5 to 6 hours, I see no reason not to wishlist it and check it out once it comes out, and Prologue is a great way to gauge your interest in the Babel Code. And you'd think I'd be done, but I should probably mention that aside from these 3 titles, there's a book, and if that isn't the most Megaten-inspired thing I've ever heard, I'm not sure what is. Elohim Eternal, Battle at the Mount, further expands upon the Babel Code by going into the events of the fight at Mount Sinai years before the events of the main game. We see some familiar faces and meet a few new ones, with it mostly focusing on Beoz's mother, Rahab. Obviously, you don't need to read this roughly 80-page adventure to understand the game, but it does add a lot more lore to the franchise, and at this point, I think if you're invested in the Elohim Eternal world, you may as well soak up as much lore as you can. The book is also free to download, so yeah, check it out if you're interested. And if a video game, a prologue chapter, a novella, and a free-to-play upcoming side game wasn't enough, George has also already announced Elohim Eternal 2, Son of Man, and a free-to-play side game to that one currently dubbed Elohim Eternal 2.5. These ones have mechs in them. I'm not sure when those are coming out, but if you're interested, there's plenty else to play and look forward to in the meantime. George has said that his idea for this franchise is 6 main games, each with a free-to-play side game. So yeah, there's a lot on the horizon for this ambitious series. Let me know if you want me to eventually cover Son of Man in one of these videos when that eventually comes out, but for now, I think I am Elohim Eternal'd out. There was definitely a lot to get through here, but I had fun with it. Okay, so this next one might require a bit of explaining. I found a game on itch.io called Sacrament 4 from the developer Me Less Than 3. The page for this game describes it as a post-disaster occult horror RPG/text adventure inspired by the likes of Shin Megami Tensei, Evangelion, and pre-tribulation premillennialism.
I know some of these words.
However, I'm not here to just talk about Sacrament 4, because much like Elohim Eternal Prologue, this is only one small part of something bigger. In this case, a title from 2018 called Lucah, Born of a Dream. You see, Sacrament 4, as the name suggests, is the fourth sacrament, all of which are stories or events found within Born of a Dream itself. So, despite Sacrament 4 being released as a standalone title, it's just a small part of Lucah, so I'm going to talk about that first, but I'll come back to 4 in a bit. You play as this person. Am I Lucah? Maybe I am. I got to name myself. I called myself Lucah. They do the Pokemon all caps thing, where it sounds like everybody just says Lucah really loud. You wake up on a beach in this forest and have virtually nothing to go on besides being a cyan squiggly. After learning how to beat up dangerous red scribbles, you continue on your journey. If I had far less respect for all of you and myself, I'd call Lucah Born of a Dream the Dark Souls of Megami Tensei inspired indie games. You have light attacks, heavy attacks, and dodges that eat up stamina, so dodging and parrying are both important to stay alive while your stamina refills. I was originally a little worried about playing this game, to be honest, because I am generally not good at spectacle fighters, particularly those of a debatably Dark Soulsian variety. Like, look, I died to the very first boss. Oh no, wait, that was supposed to happen. I guess maybe I don't suck that much after all. Oh, no, I do. I'm pretty sure I was only able to beat this pair of purple scratchies called the Hive because I accidentally freed Michael during the fight and he decided to help out. That was clearly a team effort. Fortunately, Me Less Than 3 accounted for people like myself who suffer from the debilitating effects of being terrible, and this game actually has some of the most versatile difficulty customization options I've ever seen in a game like this. Not only are there 2 separate difficulty settings, one that affects you and one for enemies, you can also speed up or slow down the entire game. And there are even in-game cheat codes that offer things like super increased HP, making enemies suck even more, infinite stamina, infinite charge, and so forth. In an attempt to keep some dignity, I only turned on the Make Enemies Suck code. Basically, if you're someone who's nervous about more action-oriented games, or whether you want more of a challenge, Born of a Dream actually gives you a lot of control as to how difficult your experience will be. There are plenty of different combat styles and these things called virtues that you can use for passive bonuses, sort of like Paper Mario's badge system. So the combat also feels really fun, frantic, and engaging, but above all, rewarding. Even if you do need to make it a bit easier to feel good about yourself, that's perfectly fine. You also get familiars that can help you out in battle with a variety of effects, and thanks to a helpful merchant, you can visit a garden where you can pet them. Well, this is the best game ever. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to collect all the familiars because one of them requires you to beat this arcade game that I suck at. As you can see for yourself, the game is a visual treat, with the scribble-like designs and textures adding a lot to the world. When I first saw footage for this game, I was actually a little afraid that it'd be hard to keep track of things. But aside from struggling with parries because I have the reflexes of Spanish salted ham, and by the time I realized which side was my enemy's face, I'd already been smacked across the room, I found it pretty easy to know what I could or couldn't interact with because of the fantastic use of color. As the name suggests, Born of a Dream often feels like you're in a dream, with weird logic and how you move from one place to another. You just kinda wander from place to place, and there's very little actual direction. From that forest, you wind up in a church where these worshippers are all flagellating themselves, but you also wind up on subway cars, a gladiatorial arena run by a corrupt leader, and I already mentioned the arcade. The story of Born of a Dream is minimal, almost too minimal actually. In fact, the real story arguably doesn't even start until after you beat it for the first time and start seeing different things in New Game Plus. There are a few recurring characters, and you eventually learn a lot more about who you might be, but no matter how much you see or unlock, the game still leaves a bit too much up to interpretation for my liking, but I'll admit that the lack of concrete answers does kinda lend itself to the dreamlike nature. Lucah Born of a Dream is a game that I booted up and prepared to record a bit of footage for this video. By the time I was like, okay, that's probably good, it'd been over 2 hours and I was over halfway through the game, so I definitely found myself engrossed by a lot of what this title had to offer. In fact, it's in New Game Plus that you can start seeing those sacraments I mentioned earlier, of which there are 6. But since Sacrament 4 is the one that specifically said it was inspired by SMT, I'm just gonna focus on that one. And look, I love Sacrament 4. The game is a sort of text-adventure RPG hybrid. You play as 3 soldiers, K201, C89, and AA77, as they explore Ground Zero of a bizarre cataclysmic event where every building and life for miles was mysteriously wiped out, save for a single school. While most of the game is told through text, there are moments where you explore the school through a menu adventure game style system, and as these 3 agents come face to face with nightmares, it even delves into turn-based combat, and these segments were fantastic. Unlike most RPGs, you can't just attack, occasionally heal, attack. You have to use these different commands wisely, pay attention to what the game says the enemy is doing, lure them toward a specific character, lay down suppressing fire, and look for the right openings to deliver a successful attack. Like, look, absolutely no hate to Born of a Dream, but this world, this setting, these characters, this gameplay, oh, I'd have loved so much more of this. Like a few other things I've talked about today, this is a shorter experience, and one that is available separately if you just wanted to play it without needing to beat Born of a Dream, and get a decent way into New Game Plus, and actually manage to find where Sacrament 4 is hidden, but I want to be clear, I think that's well worth it too. Because it's so short, I don't want to say much about Sacrament 4 and risk spoiling it. So I guess that's it, and we can move on to, oh wait, did I mention Death of a Wish? No? Well, I'm gonna. This game only came out earlier in 2024, and it's a much newer experience. You play as Christian, a character and recurring boss fight from Born of a Dream. But does that make this game a sequel? An alternate universe? Just one of the many possible branches in the twisted, gnarled tree that is this dream world? Well, yes? I actually got to talk with the dev on this one, and Colin told me that Death of a Wish was originally conceived to be a sequel to Born of a Dream, but they wanted it to be accessible to those that never played the original game. So on the team, they started referring to it more as a successor rather than a proper sequel. Colin also provided me with a code for this game when I told him about this video series, so I'm very thankful for that. That was super cool of them. Mechanically, Death of a Wish is very similar to Born of a Dream, so I'm not going to go over everything again, but there is definitely a lot more to the narrative this time. There's more dialogue, expressive portraits, and the characters feel more in tune with what's going on. It's got a generally darker, more pessimistic vibe that, while I enjoyed, can definitely start to feel a little heavy. While you can just jump straight into Death of a Wish, I'd probably still recommend starting with Born of a Dream as an introduction to this world and its mechanics if it looks like something you're curious about. It's a matter of personal preference, but I'd personally prefer it if you were willing to give both games a shot. Also, Me Less Than 3, if you're watching, seriously, full-blown Sacrament 4 style RPG, like get on that. I'll help, let's make that happen. A while back, there was an image going around Twitter that said, "The last TV show you watched is now getting a crossover with the last video game played." And sure, I played along. At the time, I was rewatching Gravity Falls and playing Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, respectively. But after having a nice chuckle and making my tweet, I realized, actually, yeah, a Megami Tensei-like RPG set in a Gravity Falls-like town would be absolutely amazing. Anyway, Bloomtown, A Different Story, is absolutely amazing. Despite the surface-level Persona comparisons, I still decided to just go ahead and ask, so I reached out to the folks who run the official Bloomtown Twitter to check if there was any specific Megaten inspirations, and they told me, yes, Persona has definitely been a strong inspiration. It is a game we absolutely love and respect. So, there you go. The publisher for the game, Twin Sails Interactive, actually sent me a Steam code for the title, and in that email they said, Bloomtown is a narrative JRPG mixing turn-based combat and social RPG features inspired by classic JRPGs like Chrono Trigger and Earthbound, but also modern ones like Persona and Sea of Stars. Now, despite getting a Steam key, all the footage you're seeing here is from the Switch version, because I was still excited enough for this game to buy it. You play as Emily, a young girl who is arriving in Bloomtown for the summer with her brother Chester. They'll be staying with their grandpa, who I'm going to humorously call Grunkle Sojiro in the hopes that at least one of you will laugh. And on the surface, Bloomtown has a lot of modern, cozy game vibes, albeit shown from the perspective of a little kid visiting a small town. You can plant crops in the backyard garden, help your grandpa's friend at the grocery store to earn some pocket pennies, go fishing, cook food items like delicious black licorice wheels, hang out with your friends, get swole as heck, explore the twisted versions of Bloomtown locations to fight monsters in a realm known only as the Underside and defeat them with the power of your not personas, and read books. The world is your oyster when you're a kid on summer vacation. Before long, Emily is contacted by, just straight up Lucifer, and told that she'll need to take down 3 pesky demons in the Underside. While the game's narrative tries to paint a sense of urgency to this task, it doesn't actually line up with the gameplay, and thankfully, summer lasts for as long as you want in the world of Bloomtown. While they could have easily put Persona-style deadlines on these chapters, I'm really glad they didn't, because I think that would weaken the cozy aspects of this nightmare-filled creepy town game. There's a narrative rush, but one that the game forgoes to remain chill. Kinda like how Tom Nook will never actually send the raccoon goons after you. Joining Emily on her quest is her brother Chester, a local tomboy named Ramona, and an immortal talking corgi named Hugo, who gets jacked when you're in the Underside. Lucifer helps these children take on demons by awakening their inner guardians, which, come on, they're totally personas, and I am okay with that. Emily gets a rather dapper-looking furry, Ramona has a creepy puppet lady, Chester gets a cyborg T-Rex, and Hugo gets an ancient Aztec warrior. After defeating the first demon, the gang also adds a 5th member, a handy-dandy fix-it girl named Ruth, who kinda takes on the Fuka Rise Futaba role, but she doesn't get her own guardian, she just gets, walkie-talkies. Something that I actually really like about Bloomtown is that taking down the 3 demons are all treated as different mysteries for our group of kids and their talking dog to solve. The first case, for example, involves searching for a missing child, but the second one is actually a murder mystery where you have to not only find the culprit, but help the ghost of a victim in the Underside figure out who they even were in life. The game does a truly good job at blending a sense of seedy realness to the more occult-based settings, and there are times when it's genuinely unsettling, especially given the young age of the protagonists. Unlike a Persona game, your days aren't limited by specific time periods, but time passes as you explore the town and do stuff more like a traditional life sim. So for example, if you get started on it early enough, you can actually spend time with multiple friends and witness their social link style stories in a single day. And I found myself really liking most of these stories. The blossoming friendship between Emily and Ramona is genuinely heartwarming. Seeing Chester try to be more independent by falling in with the wrong crowd makes you want to protect him, but that very act may push him further away. And learning more about Hugo's tragic history and his previous owners were all really enjoyable. My only real complaint is that there just aren't that many of these stories. Emily only has these social link style events with her party members, including Ruth, and each character only gets a small handful of them, these being the only place the characters have any sort of growth as characters, since they don't really change or grow throughout the main plot. Other characters may have side quests and stuff, but I'd have liked more social opportunities to get to know the residents of Bloomtown and make it feel a lot more inhabited. However, your party members do gain some incredible passive abilities for doing these quests, so trust me, it's always worth the effort rather than just plowing through the combat stuff. Of course, you can also choose to spend your time by going into the Underside, but here's a helpful tip. Whether you enter that alternate world at 10 AM or 9 PM, you're coming out of it at 9:30 at night. So it's always a good idea to make the most of your day before you blow the whistle to enter that crazy hell dimension to go fight demons. Speaking of the combat, it's Persona 5. Every character has melee attacks and ranged attacks, the latter of which refill their ammo at the end of each fight. You can knock enemies down by exploiting their elemental weaknesses, and from there you can either try to recruit them or initiate an all-out attack. Buffs and debuffs last 3 turns a pop, and you can inflict status ailments on enemies to make them more susceptible to other types of damage. Bloomtown does add a few semi-distinct ideas that work for me, like a positioning system where you can't attack demons with melee weapons if another demon is in front of them. But some just feel like they're trying to be different for different sake, and I don't necessarily like it. Like deciding that Persona's one more system for exploiting weaknesses should only reward you an extra turn sometimes. You know, as a treat. Aside from their main guardian, each character can recruit one demon, to grant them access to additional spells, so there's a nice level of party customization there. Thanks to Lucifer's help, you can fuse demons together to strengthen your existing ones, so even early game demons can remain viable if there's a specific skill set that you like using. I do admittedly have one small complaint with the battle system though. See, every single round in Bloomtown follows the same turn order. Emily, Ramona, Chester, Hugo, and then the demons. Once you understand this, it basically just becomes a call for dominant strategy to have the early moving characters focus on buffs, debuffs, healing, and status ailments in order to maximize Hugo's damage at the end of the round. I know I control the buttons I push and I don't have to use that strategy, but the game is just really optimized toward it. And even if that's not exactly what you're doing every turn, the battles can get kinda repetitive. However, look, I want to be clear, despite any critiques I may have, I absolutely adored this game, and it scratched an itch that I've had for a particularly long time now. The pixel art and music are absolutely phenomenal, and I found myself humming some of the tunes while I was working on stuff. This was an absolutely fantastic game, and one that I was really happy to talk about on the show. If you're a fan of this channel and you know how I do things, you can probably guess I'm going to talk about this game again very, very soon. I can't wait to see what the devs have planned for the future, and am eagerly awaiting their next title. The first game I want to talk about today is Siren's Call Escape Velocity. This is a visual novel that was successfully funded on Kickstarter and whose prologue on Steam says, "Inspired by games like Persona 4, Higurashi, and Doki Doki Literature Club, Siren's Call Escape Velocity is a tropical cocktail of delicious summertime dread." I played the prologue for this game last summer, gushed about how much I loved it on Twitter, and the dev reached out to me to send me an advanced copy of the full game. The title eventually went into early access late last year and fully launched in January of 2025, but I've basically been sitting on this one and been eager to talk about it for almost a year now. Not to give too much away in advance, but this is one of the most incredible, engaging, and immersive VNs I've ever played, and I absolutely loved it. Okay, maybe that did give away a bit too much, but alright, what is Siren's Call Escape Velocity? Well, if you've played Persona, we're all familiar with the classic trope, right? A young man temporarily staying in a small town with nothing to do accidentally stumbles upon a portal to another world. This world, full of beings called Sirens, appear to be the cause of the negative emotions for the town's citizens. The young man and his friends traverse the dangerous world and use the power of their awakened other selves, their muses, to defeat the Sirens and bring peace and contentment to the townsfolk. Congratulations, heroes! You won! Now all that's left is for our stoic protagonist to say his final goodbyes to the dear friends who fought alongside him before he leaves town tomorrow. And that is where our story begins. Siren's Call Escape Velocity is an amazing visual novel experience full of lovable characters, unique situations, fantastic artwork, and a plot that leaves you infinitely curious as to what's happening and what you need to do. The game officially starting on what is basically the denouement of a modern Persona game lets players put the pieces together themselves as to what's happened over the past several months. The game obviously uses its framework to set up a Persona-like world, and despite you never once engaging in the dungeon-crawling, RPG battles, or social link-esque mechanics, you can absolutely see how it would all fit into an actual game like that. Instead of diving into a TV or using a navigation app, the Midnight Guard enters the Sirens' world through a locker at their school. Instead of chilling at the food court or meeting up at LeBlanc, they hang out in their friend Judy's living room. The sense of world building for an RPG that you never actually get to play is impressive, and you can read through the protagonist journal to learn more about the adventures they've been on and get a feel for the mechanics of a game that, again, we never actually get to play, but by reading through it, you'd swear that you already had. It gives us a Persona-esque world, and then follows through on the actual impact of that type of an event on both our heroes and the world that they fought so hard to save. It creates a unique and unsettling atmosphere, made even creepier and likely smelling of dead fish and meth by the entire story being set in Florida, while maintaining an engaging message, and I found myself really caring about these characters and wanting to see good things happen to them, even when it seemed like that was not going to be the case. Our main character is Oliver, a seemingly quiet young man who takes on the role of the leader of the group. Then you've got your right-hand man, the sophisticated and learned Emile, the twin sisters, Judith and Andy, the tough guy with a softer side, Ashton, and finally the purple-haired artist, Violet, whom Oliver formed a romantic relationship with over the summer, despite her having a falling out with the rest of the party. The earliest chapter of the game is all about saying your final farewells to these characters and getting some one-on-one time with them, but through happenstance you're not able to get out of the town when you're supposed to. Violet notices that since defeating the Sirens, Oliver is acting peculiar, more quiet, like he's just sort of reacting to what other people are saying instead of engaging in conversation with them. Is it possible that destroying the other world wasn't the best option? Did we truly do what was best for everybody? Early in the game, Oliver is able to break away from this pre-designated role of being the leader and is free to just be himself, someone who is occasionally candid and not going to hold back on speaking his mind, essentially turning him from a silent JRPG self-insert protagonist into a much more fleshed-out character. Siren's Call knocks on the fourth wall without actively trying to break it. There's no moment where you need to open up the files and delete character.png to progress the story, but there are moments where it does something like bringing up the peculiarity of your social links standing outside of a single spot all day on the off chance that you show up and decide to use your afternoon slot to spend time with them. Also, quick side note with Oliver. Remember how I've complained about some protagonists in some of these games being just a bit too plain? Like, look at this guy. He's a skinny dude from Florida with short brown hair. But some of his poses, and yes, a simple t-shirt logo, can go a long way to making the character feel more engaging. Yes, it's a very simple graphic tee, but that plays into his personality, and the message it conveys feels right at home with the world and story. After breaking free, Oliver is basically stuck in a loop of having to say goodbye to his friends, but each day offers something different. Characters may be acting odd, or do something out of character, and over time, some of your friends seem to drop off the face of the earth entirely, which puts pressure on you to try and figure out what's going on. Where Siren's Call shines is that it's a visual novel that sets out to prey on your anxieties, and have you constantly asking yourself, wait, was that the right thing to say? While simultaneously creating the sensation that the very idea that there's a right thing to say is a flawed and somewhat problematic belief system to begin with. If you're the type of person who frequently Googles Persona 4 Moon Social Link because you forgot which dialogue choice on the first prompt of rank 3 awards the most points, then this game already knows exactly how to get inside your head. The thing is, being a visual novel, I obviously don't want to spoil too much here, as the narrative is the most engaging element of the experience. I will say, though, that I really enjoy the game's art style. The character portraits all look great, and the music does a nice job of setting the atmosphere. You can unlock a lot of artwork in the gallery by making specific choices or unlocking certain events. One thing I love is getting to see what everybody's muse actually looks like. Despite how many games I've covered that claim to be inspired by Persona, we really don't see too many Persona equivalents, so this was nice, even if they're never part of the story that we play. Another thing that I think really stands out in this game are the backgrounds, which all resemble these, dry, cracking paintings, which fits into Violet's role as an artist and gives it a good visual flair. If I had to bring up a specific complaint that I have about Siren's Call Escape Velocity, it's that it has this bad habit of dipping its toes into the actual psychological horror aspects, only to quickly yank them back out and just decide to go home for the day. There are several moments where the world starts to slowly shift around you, and when you're starting to get really uncomfortable and wondering which of your poor decisions led you to this exact moment, the game just suddenly jerks back to reality as if to say, well, that was fun, wasn't it? Moving on. Aside from the main story, there are some fun, unlockable scenes that take place during the RPG section of the timeline, and these serve as a great opportunity to see characters interacting with one another in a more lighthearted and character-driven way. Among these scenes is one of my favorite lines in the entire game. The game even comes with an entire mini visual novel starring Violet that you can unlock, which has way more meat on its bones than I was expecting. I should also mention there's a free-to-play story set in this world and still starring Oliver and exploring his home life called Sunflower Pie. It's pretty short and free and delightfully creepy, and it works as a good companion piece to the rest of this world. I understand that it may sound bizarre at first to set an entire visual novel after the big exciting RPG adventure that happened off-screen, but trust me, it works incredibly well and it makes sense. I really, truly, absolutely loved Siren's Call Escape Velocity. I've recommended it to so many people who have all told me how much they enjoyed it, so seriously, this is a story I just want more people to know about and experience. It's just so good. And I'm happy to say that on April 15th, 2025, the Pensword, developer of the game, announced that Siren's Call Second Wind is also happening. So do yourself a favor and play Escape Velocity so you can look forward to this sequel as much as I am. We've got a look at a new character named Ruth, and not a whole lot else to go on, but I'm excited to check it out when it eventually drops. The next game I'm looking at is Sorry We're Closed, which came out on Steam in November 2024, but recently came to modern consoles in spring of 2025 with a slew of awesome updates. Anyway, this game is really weird, and gay. Like, super gay. And that is probably the only time you'll ever hear me refer to anything that way, because now that I've done so, allow me to gush about how much I absolutely adore this title. But first, how's it eligible, right? Well, I stumbled upon a tweet from the developer, A La Mode Games, a few months before the title came out, where they posted, "Me sitting over here with my aesthetically SMT-inspired survival horror indie game." And, fun fact, they even admitted Kaneko's art style was a huge inspiration for the character designs. Like, I can see it, Marty definitely got that Kaneko eyeliner going on. But, alright, as the tweet pointed out, Sorry We're Closed is a survival horror indie game. The game has an intentional late PS1, early PS2 aesthetic that does a lot of heavy lifting with textures. I find the character designs and the game's distinct use of color absolutely breathtaking, whether it's the vibrant bright blue and pink of our protagonist Michelle, or the surprisingly pleasant and hauntingly liminal space of the hotel. The plot of Sorry We're Closed focuses on the aforementioned Michelle, who works in a convenience store around the corner from her crappy apartment. Or should I say flat, I'm pretty sure this game is British. Her life sucks, because 3 years ago her girlfriend dumped her and went off to become an actress on some lesbian soap opera that just, like, everyone seems to love. So one night she's minding her own business when a large demonic entity known as the Duchess is like, "Hey, you in the puffy pink jacket, love me," and curses Michelle with a third eye that allows her to shift her view between the human realm and the demon realm. And now she has to come to terms with the fact that about 3/4 of the people she knows in her neighborhood are actually celestial beings in some form. The dancer you know from the club? She's an angel. That friend of yours you chat with at the record store? Yeah, they're a non-binary demon with legs for days. Like, seriously, oh my god, Robin is so freaking hot. The super sweet guy who runs the diner? He's actually human, but don't worry, he's cool. I really like the cast of characters in this game, like the rat demon who delivers otherworldly mail, or how the guy who runs the club has his Cerberus goons by his side, but they still manage to be good boys. There's everything from massive eyesores to this bizarre crow beanbag thing called the Dream Eater. Like, seriously, I loved this dude. He was so polite when he decided to try and kill me. Oh yeah, and there's also your shopkeeper who buys artifacts for Yauzas, this game's currency, while selling you general upgrades, and he's, well,
a goddamn lamb man!
Yeah, I know he's a goat, but I wanted to use that clip, okay? Each day has you roaming the streets of your quaint little neighborhood and speaking with characters, making progress in their specific quest lines, or just seeing what certain people have been up to. I really like these sections because they give you a good opportunity to check in on people and have some downtime from the survival part of survival horror. Getting close to specific characters and helping them out is what can help you unlock one of the game's main endings, where you side with certain characters and trust their lead on how to handle your situation. Given that the game compared itself to SMT, I'd say it reminds me the most of the reason paths in Nocturne, where it's more about using your specific abilities to carry out their ideals. It works really well, but certain endings are definitely harder to get than others, which is good since it encourages repeat playthroughs. After you're done socializing around your neighborhood, you head to one of the game's dungeons, like the subway station or a nearby aquarium, which, by the way, is a surefire way to get on my good side. I adore aquariums. Once here, you fight off demons while exploring memories of other victims who fell under the same curse as you, getting glimpses into how they thought they could escape from the Duchess, while ultimately trying to get their third eyes to help strengthen Michelle enough to potentially break the curse on her own. As you can see, the game utilizes a fixed third-person camera, which works insanely well for the survival horror genre. Like, this has always been my preferred style for this type of game. But that doesn't mean I didn't find myself trying to nudge the right analog stick every now and then to get a better view in certain spots. Combat in Sorry We're Closed is interesting. Whether you're using your super cool axe or your gun, you take down hostile demons. Your two main options are fighting them in the standard realm, where you can hit them anywhere but do way less damage, or in the realm of your third eye, to reveal their weak points, where you have to hit those, but for way more damage. Activating Third Eye will briefly stun enemies, and like in many survival horror games, sometimes this is just useful to slip by enemies rather than engaging them. One thing I never got used to is that whether it's in the Third Eye perimeter or not, you can only attack by entering the designated first-person mode. And even well into the game, I'd still find myself just trying to swing my axe from the hip, only for the attack button to not do anything. A little thing that this game does that I absolutely love is that healing items are just water. Like, just fresh, clean water. I can't explain why, but in the genre full of green herbs, syringes, or entire gallons of orange juice, there's just something I appreciated about water being what makes you feel better. While the original quote I pulled mentioned SMT, and many other reviewers and videos have made a Persona comparison, there are many ways where it feels like the main Atlas game they took some cues from was the non-Megaten title, Catherine. The main recurring theme throughout Sorry We're Closed is love, and it's told in a mostly mature and adult way. Whether it's the fallen demons that desire a return to God's love, the Duchess's warped views of love, or how different characters try to mend, repair, or just stabilize their own relationships, it's very emotionally gripping. With a unique cast that explores so many elements of sexuality, gender identity, and even ideals about whether a human can date a demon, or what happens when demons date angels, it's all just kind of a mess, but a beautiful, engaging one that I really appreciated. Nobody is perfect, nobody knows what they're doing, and we're all just trying to get by while holding on to these ideals of what love means to us and how it can fit into our lives. I feel like I've said this in every video I've done in this series, and several times outside of it, but Megami Tensei is a franchise that I firmly believe could work with any genre. So seeing a dev make a retro survival horror experience that's also loaded to the brim with an engaging story, characters, and memorable elements of demonology and Judeo-Christian symbols was just such a breath of fresh air. I feel like this is normally when I'd say something unhelpful, like, it's not for everyone, but the fact that it's not is what makes it stand out so much. Sorry We're Closed knows exactly what it is, what it set out to do, and how to carve its own identity in a way that helped it garner near universal acclaim, including from me, because this title was just fantastic. Speaking of horror games with Megami Tensei influences, the next game I want to look at is Liminal Void by J-Star. This game came out on Steam in August of 2024, but received a massive update in March of 2025, where the dev described this 1.1 release as essentially the game I wanted to make, so that's pretty cool. For a good while, this was just one of those games where I was seeing other people make the Megaten comparisons, but wasn't finding much from the developer. So I reached out and just asked them straight up, to which they responded, yeah, it's definitely early SMT inspired. Before development, I played Strange Journey. There are also influences from the first game, since they were RPG horror. It's a blur now, but SMT had a certain badassery and confidence in it that I really like. But while Sorry We're Closed went for the retro, slower, subtle survival horror, Liminal Void takes a different approach. This game is fast-paced, chaotic, frantic, and a lot of the fear comes from this overwhelming, bizarre sensation of doubting what your own senses are telling you, and just trying to maintain your composure as you get through each run. Even from the main menu, I'm bombarded by all these weird options, like faces, or whether or not we hate dogs. The story goes that humanity is on the verge of another apocalypse because the liminal layer, a realm separated from ours filled with forgotten gods and monsters, is blending into reality. However, an organization called the Liminal Layer Society can enter the void and fight these beings, even if their souls have to die again and again and again to do it. In Liminal Void, you can play as one of 4 characters, and fitting with the themes of horror and struggles, your characters are essentially some of the worst of what humanity has to offer. There's Gary, a terrorist, Helena, a serial killer, Sawain, a billionaire, and Minerva, a YouTuber. Now, you'd think that you'd learn about your favorite character by playing as them, but Liminal Void doesn't care what you think. You actually have to choose a partner on top of your playable character to act as your companion, and that's who you're going to learn more about when you get to one of the game's safer social floors and get a chance to talk to them. Although possibly keeping in themes with the chaotic nature of this world, I feel like I'd often say no to a character joining me, only for the game to be like, okay, they're with you, moving on. I often found myself unable to tell what was the game not working properly and what was the game intentionally messing with me. The general idea of Liminal Void is that you have to run around different levels of the layer and collect these floppy disks called sigils, which you also need to cast spells. Each character has access to one of the 4 elements, fire, force, blood, or light, and you can use the spells of your character and your partner character. You can unlock certain locked doors by attacking them with a specific type of magic, and you may also need to pick up batteries for your flashlight, which serves as your minimap. In an overly simplified sense, you just want to grab as many sigils as you can and make your way to the portal to the next layer as soon as possible. Liminal Void has a very interesting take on the philosophy of get good, because yes, you're going to die a lot in this game. You die from a single hit, and nearly everything wants to kill you, from dogs that chase you down, to enemies that only move when you're not looking at them, to these random skulls that just kill you because lol why not, to even just not being able to find the portal and running out the timer. However, death doesn't mean you start your run over. It actually forces you later into the game and takes away your sigils, making you weaker and less prepared for the harder enemies the game is throwing at you, so you're more likely to keep dying. You can even get to the final floor of the game and deal with the final bosses with basically nothing. Then you can die again and enjoy your bad ending because you're a sucky suck who sucks before trying again. Throughout the game, there are a few safe checkpoint levels. These give you a chance to talk with your companion character or interact with someone new to mix things up. The only other character besides your 4 heroes is this robot cat thing that's your direct connection to the LLS, who often has vague, cryptic, or downright unhelpful things to say, but still adds a lot to the game's atmosphere, world building, and can help flesh out your player character a bit more. It's a brief respite from the fast-paced dungeon crawling, and I genuinely liked learning a bit more about these characters throughout my runs. It's cool to get to these floors and see how the other party members interact with your chosen protagonist, as the relationship dynamic between the characters are drastically different. For example, Helena hates men and exclusively killed them, so naturally she's a lot friendlier to Minerva. And once you're back in the liminal layer, you never really know what you're gonna find either. On one of my runs, I ended up on top of the maze and worked my way over to a stage where Gary was wearing a maid outfit, which actually makes it the second game I'm talking about today to have unlockables that feature a male protagonist in a maid outfit, which, let's be real, is pretty awesome. That's right, Oliver from Siren's Call Escape Velocity, don't think I didn't see you. I tried out a few runs of what the game calls canon mode, which is the level of difficulty and chaoticness that the developer intended, but I will admit I did drop it down to the chill mode just to see if I could actually beat it and try to give my eyeballs a bit of a break. Turns out, no. Even if I got to layer 444 with a fair amount of sigils, I'd still get overwhelmed and immediately die before I could even figure out how to properly select the spell I want to use. But again, the idea is that with enough runs, you can get good enough to pull it off. And I'll admit that by my 4th or 5th run, I was feeling a lot more comfortable with the game, even if I still made the occasional rookie mistake. To dust off that useless phrase again, Liminal Void isn't for everyone, and that's what gives it such a unique identity. I really like the characters and a lot of the story elements, but as someone who admittedly has terrible reflexes, horrible anxiety about time limits, and gets motion sickness, a lot, easily, this isn't one I see myself going back to very often, but I do want to stress that is not the fault of the game itself. Much like Sorry We're Closed, what Liminal Void sets out to do, I'd argue it does very well, and I highly encourage fans of this type of frantic, speed-based challenge and horror to seek the title out and judge it on a level that I don't think I'm really capable of. Because I feel like I'm basically sitting here going, well, it made me nauseated, gave me a headache, and has me checking under my bed for monsters, but you know what, I really liked the character dynamics, those were so good. Oh yeah, also, gotta throw this out, the soundtrack is just loaded with bangers. Like seriously, I cannot stress enough how much I loved the music in this game. And before we move on, I do also want to point out that despite the big Liminal Void update happening quite recently, J-Star's next title, Landmine Princess, should be coming out around this time. This is a dark dating sim with a similar chaotic energy to Liminal Void, only now you're trying to date a Jirai K-girl, and with 32 endings, only 8 of which are confirmed happy ones, you're definitely going to have to be careful about what you say and do on this journey. And even this title is apparently just a lead-in to an upcoming Landmine Girlfriend, so be on the lookout for that as well if it sounds interesting to you. Okay, so this next game has some pretty interesting history to it. Remember all the way back in the very first indie games inspired by Megami Tensei, I talked about an engaging SMT-esque DRPG called Advent Crossroad, that took place in a mall, and I also mentioned the Etrian Odyssey inspired follow-up, Core Crossing, while hinting that a third title was announced, but was shifting in progress due to the developer, Nankata, now working with a publisher. The earliest version of that third game was going to be called XYZ Crossing, and it looked like this, based on the few screenshots and trailers I was able to find online. The eventual update to this story is that Nankata sold the original engine to Gummy Bytes, who used it to make their own project in a similar style called Makai Agito, which is what we're looking at today. This game came out on March 27th, 2025, the same day that Raida Remastered, The Mystery of the Soulless Army, was announced, which is really funny to me since this fresh title is a first-person DRPG with the devs tweeting that it's a game inspired by OG SMT Devil Summoner and Soul Hackers. And you know me, I love it when these Megaten-inspired indies draw from other series in the franchise. You play as Shinichi Bono, a journalist who heads to a former colleague's hometown to help them investigate a bizarre case. In this town, an event called the Witching Hour takes place every 13 years. During this time, the town becomes distorted, monsters called the Arcane roam free, cameras and recordings don't work, and when it's all over, no one remembers anything that happened during it until their memories return during the next one. Your colleague, Daigo, lost his parents 26 years ago, and you team up with a teacher named Rin who lost a close friend during the one 13 years ago. The story goes that a witch named Lady Rizuli cursed this town, and in order to break the spell once and for all, they'll need to destroy her 5 severed body parts before the witching hour ends. You explore winding dungeons, learn more about the curse, team up with more characters including a hot nun, and just try to save the town. Premise-wise, I love this. I'm a huge fan of small-town, spooky ghost story, folk horror stuff, and despite the Devil Summoner inspiration, I like that it leans into that narrative realm over the cyberpunk stuff. The game establishes everything you need to know very quickly. Your characters can fight the arcane because they have these books called grimoires that can house the creatures. You don't get to use the monsters directly in battle, but it works similarly to Soul Hackers 2, where each character equips one arcane that determines what spells they have and their elemental affinities. And look, I understand that a lot of these Megami Tensei inspired indies aren't going to appeal to all Megaten fans. Heck, this is the first RPG I'm talking about today. But let me say this, Makai Agito might just be the most Megami Tensei-esque Megaten-inspired indie that I've ever played, for better or worse. Most of the arcane are classic mythological figures that you're definitely familiar with if you're a Megaten fan, like Mothman and Pixie, while others are more extinct, like the Teruterubozu or...
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
You can negotiate with them in battle to get them to join you, but it's sort of a unique system where you just choose what you want to give them and hope it was enough to convince them. You can eventually fuse them together to make new arcane and select what spells they inherit during this process. Like, Makai Agito basically is a Megaten game. I feel like for a lot of people, this is a title that's gonna bring up the question of when an inspiration starts to fall into rip-off territory. I can't really say that Makai Agito is doing too much new, but I also feel like that's easier to forgive when it's doing most things right. The monster artist from Advent Crossroad is back, and if you'll recall, the creature designs were one of my biggest praises for that title, even if some of the designs in this game are definitely a bit too derivative for my liking. Look, I think the game is perfectly fine, but I'm not gonna sit here and try to be like, nuh-uh, this is a completely different orange pentagram with a singular wide blue eye named Decarabia. As someone who plays a lot of these Megaten-inspired indies, Makai Agito is kinda comfort food for me. It's like heading down to your local diner and just getting a burger and fries. You know it's not the most extravagant or interesting burger and fries out there, but it's good and it's filling and it delivers on what it promises. When I was speaking with Nunkata about this game, they said a big part of it was feeling like Soul Hackers 2 didn't capture what they specifically liked about the original Soul Hackers, so Gummy Bytes wanted to make a title that did, and I can certainly respect that. If you found yourself feeling the same way about Soul Hackers 2 and just want a solidly built dungeon crawler that wears its Megaten inspirations on its sleeve, you could do a lot worse than Makai Agito, so give it a shot and see for yourself. And our last game for today is actually the most recent one on this list, Mirrored Soul from Mammoth Plant, which launched in April 2025. You know, something I love about making these videos and finding new games is I often stumble upon things that I'd have never been able to tell you I wanted, but as soon as I play them, I'm like, why yes, I did want a Megami Tensei inspired detective story that's basically a demon-filled Who Framed Roger Rabbit with surreal mirror dimensions. The dev has never shied away from the title's Megaten inspirations, but I'm a fan of this tweet from about 5 years ago, where they simply said, I figure I'll post updates on my SMT clone on this account. It's called Mirrored Soul, and it's about a detective and stuff. The detective in question is named Cecil, and the "and stuff" involves him getting roped into a bizarre case to track down an escaped baseball player who went on a murderous rampage. The game really leans into the cop cliches hard, with a disgruntled chief who didn't want to call Cecil back into the fray because he's a loose cannon, but dang it, he gets results. I'm not bad-mouthing the game for that because I loved it, especially within the context of a demon-filled RPG adventure. In the course of his investigation, Cecil enters a mirror world where he teams up with his wacky, mismatched buddy cop partner, a one-eyed cat demon called Spot. As the two explore the City of Valor, they stumble upon different mirrors that can take them to different kingdoms, and encounter demons along the way for protection and to aid them in battle. Mirrored Soul has a very unique take on the negotiation system to get new demons, because every single monster in the game has their own distinct recruitment criteria. Some you have to outsmart, some you have to bribe, some you just have to convince you're as big of a jerk as they are. One of my favorites is Slava, this lava slug that basically just requires you to sit through...
Have you ever had a dream that
Some are definitely head scratchers though. Like, I wanted to recruit this guy, but he's all like, beat me and we'll talk, but both choices just bring you back to the battle. Okay, so maybe if I defeat one, the next one I talk to will acknowledge that I beat him. No, alright, well, maybe in this fight where there are two of them, one will join me if I beat the other one. Okay, no. Well, let's see, he says hand-to-hand combat, so maybe I actually need to equip and use a fist-based weapon. I don't have footage of that, that's literally something that only occurred to me right now as I was writing this. But it's that level of thinking and actual, well, detective work that made me really appreciate Mirrored Soul's negotiation system. On one hand, I really like this, because unlike SMT, Mirrored Soul does a good job making each monster feel like distinct characters, with their own personalities, hopes, and dreams, instead of just being a general personality type. On the other hand, I found that this aspect made it a lot harder to fuse them or get rid of them, because them being distinct characters with their own personalities, hopes, and dreams, instead of just being a general personality type, meant I got a lot more attached to them as characters. This is also a minor complaint, but I think there are way too many demons in this game that resist normal attacks. And by the way, if there's a demon that's weak against normal attacks, even if you like them, it's probably not a good idea to use them, because they are likely to regularly get their butts kicked, because enemies in this game actually seem smart enough to take advantage of weaknesses when they can. The combat itself is perfectly fine. Cecil and up to 3 demons use a range of attacks and spells to beat up foes. An element I like is that you gain experience as soon as you take down an enemy, meaning you and your demons, even the ones in your stock, can level up in the middle of battle. An element I don't like in this game, or any game that does this, is that reaching a high enough level means enemies of a certain level just no longer award you with any experience at all. I get that the game doesn't want you to just grind all your problems away, but I've never been a fan of that mechanic. While the elements basically have a simple, super effective or not very effective tell that's nicely choreographed by the look of the number font when you do damage, one of the main systems of combat is the combo system. When your character's combo meter fills up, you can time a button press to basically get an extra free action. You'll often chain these together with your other party members, giving you a chance to rack up a lot of damage really quickly, so I recommend learning how to best utilize these free turns as you play. Cecil and Spot's investigation into finding good hands leads to some very distinct and interesting locations. Like, the Forest Kingdom has a giant medieval castle in it ruled over by a cruel king, or the Sun Kingdom, which currently has no sun, is under the thumb of Lysin P. Slander. And just like that, I'm in an Ace Attorney game, although I suppose Cecil does resemble Gregory Edgeworth. The dialogue and characters go a long way to making this game memorable, and I really liked the juxtaposition between a rundown noir city and the magical kingdoms in the mirror worlds. Also, I'm just a huge fan of the pause menu. Like, each one of your detective tools represents one of your menu options, like your party or equipment and stuff, and that's just a neat visual thing that I really liked. Speaking of design, I am a pretty big fan of how this game looks. It uses a somewhat minimalistic approach, but everything feels very nicely conveyed. I will say this though, and this is purely personal preference, I do kinda wish there'd been facial sprites or something when the characters are talking, just to add a little bit more expressiveness or animation to what are mostly static conversations. The monsters are definitely where the game's design shines the brightest though, and as I mentioned, they all feel very distinct in personality, and their design stood out as well. There was just something exciting about not knowing what you were going to run into in the next world, and what sort of social interaction you're going to wind up having with them. Overall, Mirrored Souls is a perfectly solid RPG. It leans on a few tropes, but it does them well. Its inspirations are clear, but in a way that feels distinct and gives the title its own identity. I'm a huge fan of detective stories and stuff, so it especially tickled me for that. This is an indie RPG that I can recommend to fans of any monster collecting RPGs, not just Megaten. They're not all just going to be mythology-based RPGs with social mechanics starring students, and frankly, I think it'd be really boring if they were. With that out of the way, let's dive into our first game, a mythology-based RPG with social mechanics starring students. I can't tell you how long I've been waiting for Demonschool. Except, I can. I first heard about it in June of 2022, so I guess however long ago that was. Demonschool from Necrosoft is a spooky tactical RPG inspired by Shin Megami Tensei and Giallo horror. And how did the devs confirm the Megaten inspirations for this game? Easily. They literally released a YouTube video called Demonschool Trailer, a spooky tactical RPG inspired by Shin Megami Tensei and Giallo horror. Honestly, there's no shortage of quotes and details from the team showcasing the Megaten inspirations, with some of their own online posts just flat out saying it's a Persona-like. One of the biggest things about Demonschool's development is that this game got delayed. A lot. Like, if I had a nickel for every time they confirmed a September release date only for them to still wind up announcing a delay in late August, which isn't a lot, 2 nickels, etc, etc. But hey, I'm not really in any place to judge. I planned on having this video done, like, last December. The point is that Demonschool is out now as of November 2025, and I've been playing it, and oh my god, it's good. Some of you may remember it was in my top 10 games of 2025 list. I also want to give special thanks to the publisher, Ispeard Games, for providing me with a Switch code for the title. You play as Faye, an extroverted demon hunter who has never actually seen a demon before, but because of an ancient prophecy, believes that demons will show up at the weird remote island her new college is on. She quickly teams up with Not Goth Namako, Hunky Himbo Destin, and VHS connoisseur Newt. While most normal students seem to go through a standard academic life, our gang is given special assignments to investigate supernatural happenstances, and have to turn in their homework by Friday or be thrown in prison. Hear that, kids? Your college professors will be harder on you than your high school teachers. Each story arc takes place throughout the week, and you go through what are essentially Monster of the Week type stories, but they do eventually start to feel like they have a grander connection to the overarching plot. For example, the first week involves investigating rumors of one of those cursed VHS tapes that kills you in 3 days. Right, sorry, within 3 days, if you watch it, with a final showdown against a haunted stack of CRT televisions. There's a really nice horror movie feel to these different stories and how the characters go about investigating them, and I had tons of fun unraveling the deeper mysteries behind all the things going on the island, like memory loss, demonic rituals, mafia involvement, and whether or not Y2K will bring about the end of the world. Oh yeah, this game takes place in 1999, so a lot of the tech is charmingly outdated, but as someone who grew up in the 90s, it's comfortingly nostalgic. I'd also like to give credit to Necrosoft for making sure that their calendar is accurate. Not naming any names, but some of the games I've played on this show haven't. If that last bit didn't make it obvious, the game does operate on a calendar system, but in a way that feels more like a blend of Persona and Devil Survivor. You can go to a wide range of places throughout the island and talk to different people or engage in different activities, with the game always politely letting you know which events will actually advance time. So it's always a good idea to take a moment to explore and see some of the dailies that you can do, like plooping a coin into the fountain or petting the dog, since those won't eat up your schedule. In fact, the game is surprisingly forgiving about time, so don't worry if you need to take a little respite to fish up some Lovecraftian horrors from the depths, or enjoy a round of beetle racing. Once you unlock the ability to hang out with your party members and go through their social link-esque side quests, you can knock one of those events out, then invite them to karaoke, then cook for them, then tackle their next story quest, all in the same time block. It's pretty much just story-related scenes that advance the plot, so there's a nice comfort in knowing there's not really a risk of being unable to complete this week's assignment before your deadline. While the game boasts that you get 15 characters to recruit and stuff, I'm not a huge fan of how Demonschool doles them out. Aside from your main 4, you don't recruit anybody new until you get Mercy in like the 3rd week, and she doesn't even unlock proper combat potential until the week after that, when she gets her dog Pocket. You're basically over halfway through the game by the time you've recruited half the cast, which, yeah, that sounds evenly spread, but it feels weird to go through like 4 weeks with only a single new party member, and then the game starts throwing 2 or 3 new characters at you per chapter. It's like how people always say Naoto and Haru feel like they joined way too late in their respective Persona games, so you don't get as much time to appreciate them as you do the other characters. Demonschool has like 6 of those. And since most of their stories have multiple endings for things like romance or platonic friendship, it would have been nice to see Faye get some more interactions with some of these folks throughout the plot, especially since Faye's brash personality and unbridled enthusiasm gives her fantastic chemistry with nearly everybody. So some characters left me wishing I'd gotten to see more of their dynamics specifically throughout the plot. And speaking of characters, let's get to the battles, because they are very character-driven. While this game may look like a traditional SRPG on the surface, it uses a very distinct and complex system that rewards clever thinking. Right off the bat, characters only have 3 health by default. Attacks deal 1 damage unless they resist that type, in which case it does 0, or they're weak to it, in which case it does 2. Characters have different classes and abilities, like Faye, who can knock enemies back, while Namako can't deal damage but can stun foes on her turn and pull them closer in, and Newt, who can't attack at all but he can heal party members or boost their attack if he heals somebody already at full health. This means that movement order is just as important as placement, and sometimes you may use your pool of action points for the turn to have Faye knock out several enemies with an attack boost from Newt, rather than have Destin do anything at all. Once you settle on everyone's moves, the turn plays out like a cutscene, and I will say it is immensely satisfying to watch your characters move in sync and knock out all the enemies in one turn. Unfortunately, battles don't end when you knock out every enemy. Each fight requires you to kill a certain amount of monsters and then guide a character into the ceiling zone at the far end to officially end the battle. And every battle only has 3 criteria: win the fight, not have any characters die, and do it in a very specific number of turns. This last one is usually the toughest because you'll often see the number of enemies you need to kill is higher than what's currently on the map. So you can have a really good first turn, but then new monsters spawn in and you realize you're not well positioned to deal with them. In that sense, battles are almost more like puzzles rather than RPG fights. There's no grinding or leveling up in this game, so most of your characters will have the same basic skills that can carry them throughout the entire game. But Demonschool allows you to buff units with unlockable passive skills that can do everything from resisting status ailments to allowing you to warp through the edges of the map to the other side like it's Pac-Man. The boss battles in this game are awesome. These are definitely the most puzzly of the puzzle fights, and while the game is already gorgeous and has great music, I didn't know where else to mention that, the boss battles are so perfectly engaging and some of the high points of the entire game for me in terms of both visuals and gameplay. My only complaint is that most of the boss battles have enemies that spawn in random spots, so you can get screwed out of your top mark simply due to crappy RNG. While I do really like Demonschool, a slightly odd complaint I have is that it often feels very frantic, and I don't think moments ever really feel like they have a chance to breathe and settle in. While the fights are enjoyable, sometimes it feels like there's too many of them, and I'd rather see the story unfold a little bit more before I'm once again interrupted by gangsters or little potato blobs. I know that I wish there was less gameplay may seem like an odd criticism to have, but some of these fights really do feel needless and repetitive when I'd rather just see what's gonna happen next. And on that note, there are also several times when I do wish the story took itself a little bit more seriously. Don't get me wrong, Demonschool is funny. I laughed a lot at these characters and their interactions. I'm not expecting it to be completely serious, because then it would lose a lot of the schlocky horror charm. I think it does comedy well, but earlier I praised it for feeling like a good horror story, with some really cool and genuinely spooky situations that I want to take more seriously. But Demonschool has other plans. This would be fine if the game was purely a comedy horror title, but there are some moments where it feels like the game suddenly decides that it wants me to take it seriously, and that's just a lot harder to do because of all the quips and gags and arguably needless fights that brought us to this moment. It's so close to balancing these elements perfectly, but I think it leans just slightly too hard on the comedy, which I feel detracts from the actual horror. I want to be clear, absolutely nothing I encountered in Demonschool is a deal breaker. It is still an amazing title, and one I'll definitely play through again to try out different characters and strategies and party setups. But I will admit, I definitely found myself not loving it as much as I was expecting to. Of course, that's partially on me and my own expectations and wants that I built up from following the game for years, rather than anything Demonschool actually did wrong. It is a great title for fans of horror, and it's easy to see the Megami Tensei influences, with a lot of the monster designs being references to horror films and tropes. And I don't really know how to end this section, so I'm just going to say that I love Gem. Sweet little boar baby deserves all the smooches. So I'm actually a really big fan of the work of Ben Yahtzee Croshaw. I've been watching Zero Punctuation since back when the first new episode was on the MMO title Tabula Rasa. I was front and center when he relaunched Fully Ramblematic on Second Wind after leaving The Escapist. I've read a few of his novels, I referenced his work in my 2009 Persona 3 webcomic, and I was there when he knew so little about the Persona series that when reviewing Catherine, he said that Persona was about battling monsters in a dream. But then in 2017, something interesting happened. Yahtzee played Persona 5, and he enjoyed it so much that he's now clamoring for Atlus to release Persona 6 like the rest of us. And Persona became one of his go-to examples for almost any game that had even somewhat similar social mechanics incorporated into the main gameplay loop.
We call it the BioWare Bro Buffet, but between this and Persona 5, BioWare seem to be the worst at it. There's a rather Persona-esque mechanic where we level up relationships with characters to develop skills. Combat also has enough of that Persona 5 energy about it to keep the pace up. There's a Persona-esque mechanic where party members increase their friendship levels by hanging out, and that gives you extra benefits in combat, which made me think, ooh, sounds like Persona. And the high watermark for that is the XCOM or Persona thing, or more informatively, a very Persona-y kind of way.
Oh, actually, let's put a pin in that last one and just move on. My point is that when the Persona series does such a great job forming your basis for quality social storytelling in video games, it makes sense that when you make a video game with an emphasis on social mechanics, that Persona is going to play a large role in the inspiration for that. And that's what we have with Mr. Croshaw's latest and biggest title, 2024's Starstruck Vagabond. Yahtzee even said on the official Twitter for the game that the social system works kinda like Persona. You build up a relationship score with a crew member, then when it reaches a certain point, you unlock a cutscene to advance their story to the next stage. And then he also added, you improve relations by talking to them and listening to their input, not by throwing an egg at their face every day. The story begins with your intrepid space hero, in my case a captain named Astronaut Ice Cream, on a mission to collect a valuable mineral known as Miraclium. Or Miraclium, I'm not actually sure. But stuff inevitably goes wrong, and you wind up frozen in cryosleep for over 2,000 years. An element that I really like about this tutorial is that it introduces you to your silent protagonist through a series of dialogue choices. But after your character wakes up, you're assigned a personality type based on the choices you made in that tutorial. And this determines how your no longer silent protagonist interacts with other characters. Or you can just tell the robot it's full of crap and choose whichever personality type you like. The best way I can describe why I really like this is to quote Yahtzee himself when he was talking about the Saints Row protagonist, in that they're sculpted by the player but given agency by the game, simultaneously giving us something that belongs to us but which can also surprise us with their actions. Like sure, I'm playing as pink trenchcoat wearing bitter apathetic astronaut Ice Cream, but your character may be a more caring, upbeat altruistic type with boobs and an eye patch or something. So without too much else to do, the lawyer in charge of managing your affairs gives you a rundown ship and advises you to set up an interstellar delivery service to earn some extra cash. Your very own Planet Express, as it were. You load up crates, warp to the quadrant they're headed for, and enjoy a leisurely fly through space, dodging the occasional asteroid or dust storm, and making sure your ship stays fueled, clean, and physically intact. You use different tools, and there's a nice simple but satisfying color-coded onomatopoeia text to describe your actions. Another inspiration Yahtzee has said went into this game was Stardew Valley, and Starstruck Vagabond really does manage to capture that sense of finding complete contentment in the mundane. It's so incredibly easy to lose track of time as you tell yourself you're just going to do one more delivery, or survey the uncivilized planets in just one more section of the galaxy. But then you find a PDA on a derelict spaceship unit that tells you where the next upgrade unit is in a nearby sector, and hey, now I've got enough units and delivery money to get that extra warp drive, so may as well head to this other sector to survey their planets, and suddenly it's 4 in the morning and I have to be up for work in 3 hours. However, it can get lonely out in the vast emptiness of space, and that's where your crew comes in. And if you think a crew might limit the personal satisfaction you get from cleaning the gunk out of the impulse engine yourself, good news! They do not help you out even a little bit. There are a total of 9 crew members to unlock in Starstruck Vagabond, but you'll only get 5 of them in a single run, meaning that if you do a second playthrough, you are going to have at least one duplicate character, so that's as good a way as any to figure out who your favorite is, I guess. Each one plays off of existing tropes or ideas in sci-fi and brings their own charm and passive abilities to the table. In my run, I recruited Syl, a Valley Girl accented snake woman, Hole, a mostly invisible except for his eyebrows jerk who steals fuel for you, Second, a peaceful bathrobe-wearing bear who thinks he's already dead, and whom I mostly recruited because the humor of having a bear party member in a game with Persona inspirations was just too good for me to pass up, Burlap, an all-powerful alien hive mind who's become bored of this whole existing thing, and Magu Pai, a busty pink-haired anime babe in a schoolgirl outfit who immediately falls in love with you because, again, I'm leaning into the most Persona-esque possibilities here. While each crewmate has social scenes, depending on your established personality type, you can even romance some of them. And I think it's pretty obvious which crewmate gets astronaut ice cream hot enough to melt and make the sheets all gross and sticky. That's right, it's the Snake Girl. Duh. This also makes it the second game that I'm covering today to have smooching snakes in it. You do you, destined from Demonschool. While the post-dad game style of gameplay may not be what everybody wants from a fantastic space adventure that focuses on characters and an escalating plot about a mysterious giant egg in the middle of the galaxy, it's full of charm and humor, as one should generally expect when it comes from Yahtzee. Much like a few other titles I've covered in this series, I fully acknowledge this is not a game where I can say, yes, if you loved Persona 5, you're guaranteed to love this. But I absolutely love it for what it is, and the use of Persona Social Link style mechanics enhances that experience. Starstruck Vagabond is fun and a great way to unwind after a long day. Interacting with your crew is simple and organic, whether you're just talking to them on your ship or gathering everybody around for a home-cooked meal in your galley, where you can mix peppers and stuff together to make curry, or combine a biscuit and another biscuit to make 2 biscuits. Just like Mama used to make. I can see how the Persona inspiration went into the rank-up events, and it's nice to have a game like this where everybody is going to have their own experiences. I'm certainly at the age and stage of my life where I can love and appreciate a slower adventure focusing on performing my mundane little tasks in a big open galaxy. Between me recording all my footage for this game and finally getting this video ready to go, the game has finally launched on consoles, except for the Switch, but Yahtzee has said he's still aiming to bring it there at some point. That's probably the console I'd most like to have this game for, because the relaxing nature of it really does lend itself nicely to being a game I'd like to enjoy in bed with a blanket and a nice snack and my favorite TV show in the background, instead of the way I did play it, which was hunched over my desk like I was doing, well, work, funnily enough. One of the most interesting things about doing this series of videos is discovering how many titles that I was already really excited for and loved playing ended up having a Megami Tensei inspiration after the fact. If you've been following this channel or seen me on social media, you may recall that I've been absolutely obsessed with Promise Mascot Agency, and it even ended up being my #1 game of 2025. I'd been keeping tabs on this game for a long time, but it was only when the developer graciously gave me a code for the game back when it came out that I got to speak with the game's director, Ollie Clark-Smith, and got quite a bit more detail about how SMT, and specifically Persona 4, influenced this world, its characters, and the mechanics. But some of my favorite quotes I got were, "The team at Kaizen first discovered our love for SMT with Persona 4. I played it a few years after it came out and convinced the others to play it. I think it was a life-changing game for all of us." Ollie went on to say, "For Promise Mascot Agency, one of the inspirations was Persona 4, exploring a rural Japanese town, meeting strange people, and encountering the supernatural. They also told me, our games prioritize atmosphere and otherworldliness, and I think that's the most direct comparison between us and SMT. In our next games, I hope we can get more into demonology and the occult and create something that feels esoteric like an SMT game. So that last quote is not directly related to Promise Mascot Agency, but I just want to say whatever that ends up being, I am already on board. That sounds awesome. But for now, we've got Promise Mascot Agency, a game where you play as a Yakuza named Michizane, voiced by the Yakuza actor Takaya Kuroda, aka the voice of Kazuma Kiryu.
あんたのラブホテルを奪いに来たんじゃなか。俺がここに来たのはマスコット事務所を経営するためぞ。
At first that might seem like typecasting, but according to the devs, he was actually the one who reached out to them wanting to audition, so kudos to the man for knowing what he likes to do. Michizane soon finds himself in a hot pot of debt soup because his incompetent higher-ups decided that 2 dudes in a beaten-up truck was enough security detail for the delivery of 12 billion yen. After things go obviously awry, Michi is banished to the quaint Japanese town of Kasomachi, a fairly nice place with historic mines, an admittedly subpar train system, a corrupt mayor, and an ancient, vengeful, and very specific curse that slowly kills any male Yakuza who dares enter it. While in this town, he's instructed to pay off his debt by running the Promise Mascot Agency alongside Pinky, a severed finger mascot who acts as a nice comedic balance to Michi's more serious nature and is the perfect blend of wacky, chaotic, funny, and violent. Because in this world, Japanese-style mascots are just ordinary citizens with their own jobs, hopes, dreams, and personalities rather than being people in costumes. And while you can recruit many of them to work for your agency, some of them are just content to do their own thing, like taking care of the town shrine or opening their own game center. Promise Mascot Agency is a game where it feels like you're doing a lot of disconnected things, but they all act in service of each other in a way that makes sense and feels really rewarding. Michi and Pinky drive around town in his invincible K-Truck to find collectibles and quest items. You can send the mascots out on jobs to earn money, but if something goes wrong while they're gone, you get to play the game's equivalent of combat. This works by using your mascot hero cards to deal damage to whatever obstacle is in your mascot's way. It does feel kinda tense because there's a timer, but I found I'd always be good to go so long as I used cards with high numbers, particularly the ones that give you more action points so you can play more cards. Of course, you can also send your mascots out with specialty items that reduce the chances of something going wrong, which can feel a little weird, because essentially your reward for using these items is not having to play a fairly big part of the game. But hey, you don't have to use them, and there are benefits to stuff going wrong and engaging with the battles, so you can do that too if you want. Your mascots have stamina and usually require additional support, like monetary bonuses or some vacation time, so there's always a good balance to how many jobs you can take on at a given time. Finding those collectibles I mentioned earlier and giving them to the townsfolk is what allows you to strengthen their hero cards, and there are always tons of little side things that you can do, like play a crane game to sell mascot merchandise, have Pinky debate the mayor in heated political action, or just, you guessed it, go fishing. Because such a huge part of this game is just exploring the surprisingly large map, I do have to judge it based on how much fun it is to actually get around. While the game has plenty of fast travel points that can make getting to most regions easy enough, it's honestly a lot of fun just driving around in Michi's truck, especially when you start getting the upgrades for it that allow you to do things like shoot Pinky out of a cannon to hit certain collectibles, grinding along rails Tony Hawk's Pro Skater style, which admittedly never actually seems necessary, but screw you, it's cool and fun. Or if you're sick of just driving everywhere, you can always, straight up fly. Even when fast traveling was an option, I was perfectly content to just soar over the idyllic Japanese town and take in the sights. Besides, you never know when that little cannon icon is going to pop up and give you something to fire at. I absolutely love the world, story, and characters of Promise Mascot Agency. The dialogue is great, and I adore the juxtaposition between these characters. Michi is just such a good straight man to this insane world of bubbly mascots who might happen to enjoy darker things like violence or porn. I like seeing how it unfolds, and by the end of it, you'll feel as attached to Kasomachi as you do to Kamurocho or Inaba. Back when the title first came out, I did a video on my top 10 mascots, so go watch that if you're curious, but to highlight a few of my favorites, you've got a lisping strawberry shave ice vampire, a constantly sobbing but optimistic block of tofu, a goth girl burial mound obsessed with history who doesn't think she's cute, a salaryman cat who acts as the mascot of the ATM machines you'll need to keep the Yakuza from killing your hot matriarch, and a blocky Japanese kanji sex idol with legs for days. The more you send your mascots out on jobs, the closer you grow to them, which allows you to unlock, you guessed it, social scenes with them. While Persona 4 has social links, or SLs, Promise Mascot Agency has life satisfaction events, or LSs. It's really nice getting to know these mascots more as characters and learn about their hopes, dreams, and reasons for being a part of your agency. Oh yeah, also, one of the mascots is all about avoiding burnout at work, and he speaks in these, Lovecraftian mantras, and I adore him. There's also a living serving of motsunare, which as a dish sounds absolutely disgusting. But guess what? He's such a chill and fun dude that, yeah, I'd try it for him, which I guess makes Motsun an effective mascot for it. Promise Mascot Agency is a game where every facet of it leans nicely into another element of it. So while it may seem like you have a lot on your plate at any given time, it all plays well together, and I felt like everything I did contributed to my overall goal in a meaningful way. The more you get into it, the more you feel like you're making real progress, and that's an immensely satisfying and rewarding feeling that made me want to come back to the game again and again. Like I said, this was my #1 game of 2025, and I'm incredibly eager to see what else these devs have in store for the future. Let me know who your favorite mascot was in the comments below. And hey, while we're on the subject of quaint Japanese living, let's take a look at SunnySide. This title's Kickstarter blurb says that it was inspired by classics like Harvest Moon with deep social sim aspects of a Persona game. SunnySide is the next chapter in farming sims. Now, in the interest of fairness, I want to say this up front. I bought and played the physical PS5 version of SunnySide for this video. And according to the developer, Affogato Games, who used to be Rainy Games when this title actually came out, the publisher, Maximum, was the one in charge of the console port, and they have not been eager to fix the issues with this version, which Affogato supposedly didn't have permission to work on. In fact, when Affogato finally got control of the game back from the publisher, they delisted the console versions from storefronts because it was just that broken, and they've basically gone on record saying that version shouldn't have existed. So please bear that in mind that some of the issues I have with this game, might not be issues for those that play the Steam version, which has gotten a few more patches and updates since the game's launch in summer of 2024. As I mentioned back when I talked about Bloomtown on the show, the idea of a Megami Tensei-esque farm sim is absolutely my cup of tea. If Atlus ever decided to make Rune Factory but set in destroyed Tokyo, I'd need to hire someone to make sure I'm not dead every couple of days. However, despite the Persona comparison from the creators, this game initially had me asking what I now affectionately refer to as the Culina question, which is basically, are you actually inspired by Persona in some way, or do you just have social mechanics? I mean, sure, your weird but lovable robot fox mascot thing is a bit Persona-y, I guess, but other than that, the game feels relatively down to earth. Until you discover that there are monster-filled dungeons that you can explore with turn-based combat. What? Okay, let's back up. I'm playing as John SunnySide, no relation, who decides to buy a piece of land, sight unseen, in a small Japanese countryside town. Unlike a lot of other farm sims, there's no inheriting the farm from grandpa, and you just bought a total mess of a plot. There's not even a house on it, and you're going to spend a lot of time just living in a tent. Fortunately, you can quickly start farming and befriending the locals, who happen to mostly be a rather impressive selection of young hot single people of varying cultural backgrounds and sexual orientations. Like all remote Japanese countryside towns. So, alright, I'm John, the new owner of Mayonnaise Farm. Now let's turn it into the best darn home I can. On the surface, SunnySide seems like a lot of other farming sims out there. You plant crops, chop trees for wood, break rocks for ore, craft stuff, raise animals, go fishing, all the usual stuff. But so often, this game feels like it's trying to do things a little differently just for the sake of being different. And nowhere is this more apparent to me than the Steam page ending with, and I quote, "Disclaimer. SunnySide is a farm sim with no watering cans, shipping containers, gift-based socializing, mayonnaise machines, marriage, children, or a hotbar crowded with tools." At first I wasn't really sure why the game goes out of its way to act like watering cans killed their grandma or something, until I realized that water is a utility in this game that you have to run through your farm, and having a watering can would basically just raise the question of why I can't get all the water I need for my crops from the river that's like 10 feet away. SunnySide is not a game of instant gratification. It's gonna take time for you to build your land into a proper home, to collect materials, to make progress with people, to learn the layout of the town or unlock new ways to get around like a helpful bicycle. I can respect and appreciate that core idea, and yeah, it does feel really rewarding when you finally upgrade from your tent to a small shack, because you made it yourself from the ground up. With the help of a magic robot drone, which surprisingly, no, is not the Robot Fox one. You can get blueprints for plenty of structures and furnishings, and there's a nice level of creative freedom to how you want to personalize your land. I ended up putting a lot of time into this game because I wanted to make sure that I actually had stuff to show off for the video. Because if I just shown you my first 20 hours or so, you really wouldn't have seen that much. This isn't a game where you're likely to have an upgraded house and a fully stocked goat barn halfway through the first spring. I was well into autumn before I even got my first quails. Oh, by the way, you can get quails in this game. That's something I've actually been wanting from a farming game for a long time, so nice job there, SunnySide. It can definitely feel a bit slow, but that may be perfect for people that want to get invested in this type of game and world. I did find it really satisfying whenever I actually got something checked off and made some positive changes to my character's quality of life. While there's plenty of stuff you can do in town, you can also hop on a bus and head to the city for when you want a day of shopping to pick up some appliances or things for your home. When you're not tending to your land, you're likely going to want to interact with the townsfolk, and the social mechanics in this game are honestly pretty good. Part of Sparky's mission, that's your Robot Fox whatever thing, is to study humans and their relationships, so there are plenty of benefits to talking to pretty much everybody you see when you see them and getting closer to them. You can invite them to hang out and pick the spot yourself, or wait for them to text you and see what they want to do. Every resident has their own stories to tell in a nice social link-esque system, and it's honestly really fun to just explore and do various activities with them. I think most of the 3D models in this game look fine, and I actually really do like the character artwork, but one thing I find really odd and don't really like is how during social scenes, it seems like they almost coat the world in a thin layer of Vaseline to make everything except the text boxes and portraits look blurrier. I'm not sure if this was intentional to draw your focus to the portraits, or if it's just a graphical hiccup from this PS5 version, but it's not the most visually engaging choice in my opinion. But now, let's shift gears to what I consider one of the best and most important mechanics in a life sim game like this, the romantic elements. Most modern farming or life sim games have simplified dating to where any character with any pronouns can date any eligible single person. And SunnySide, well, remember how I said some things just feel like they're different for the sake of being different? So, during character creation, you select your gender identity, and that basically ranges from -10 to 10. One side is more feminine, the other is masculine, with general androgyny being in the center. You can choose whatever gender identity you want regardless of your appearance, which is nice, but part of SunnySide's aim for realism means eligible romance options are only attracted to specific ranges of this gender slider. What this means is that by the time you reach the end of character creation, before you even arrive in town, you may have already locked yourself out of being able to date a character that you might really like. Which I'll admit, yes, there is a depressing level of authenticity to having the person I like having zero romantic interest in me, but it's generally not what I look for in video games, particularly ones that emphasize their dating mechanics. Fortunately for me, the character that I was the most interested in dating, Kaida Amaya, the hot priestess who happens to guide you on your JRPG monster-filled cave exploration, is romantically interested in my gender setting, which I've generously decided is a masculine 6. There are some pretty nice dates, even if the visuals are hilariously awkward at times. Like having a fully clothed Hot Springs date where she keeps my eyes at boob level. Actually, scratch that, that sounds awesome. But remember from before, this game has no marriage or children, so it means after a few dates, the entire romance storyline just kinda ends. Like, I guess we're just done now. And cycling back to Kaida helping me fight monsters, the whole RPG thing is honestly kind of the least interesting part of this game. You fight these Japanese yokai in the mines with turn-based combat where different cards have different elemental effects. It's perfectly functional, but I found chopping down trees with a machete way more satisfying than blowing up Oni with earth magic, and there's just something about that feels wrong. Overall, SunnySide is fine. Ambitious is a nice word I would use to describe it. I enjoy the quaint little town, there's a nice variety of characters, and even the background RPG dungeon elements kinda work to help establish that Persona comparison that makes the game eligible for this video in the first place. Otherwise, I'd just be sitting here going, yeah, the shop menus kinda have this P5 art style, right? But here's the big but. No matter what nice things I have to say about this title, and I feel like I have done that here today, SunnySide is probably the closest we've come to a game in this video series where I can't fully recommend it, because there is one incredible flaw that sucked away nearly every single bit of goodwill and enjoyment I've had with this game. SunnySide loves to freeze on me. While I'm chopping wood, while I'm trying to woo Kaida, while I'm just trying to check the enormous map and figure out where the heck I'm trying to go, this game freezes. And that wouldn't be so bad on its own, but it's coupled with the fact that SunnySide does not allow you to manually save your game, and the autosave only activates once per in-game day when you go to bed at night. And I absolutely hate that. I've completely lost so many productive and fulfilling days because the game decided to freeze as I was wrapping things up or heading back to my farm at the end of a day. It sucks. It's an absolutely sucky combination of bugs and intentional mechanics that makes it really hard to stay invested, regardless of how much I enjoyed other elements of this game. Which, to clarify, I did! There is some good stuff here as a hybrid farm sim RPG with Social Link-esque mechanics. But like I said, I played the buggy unpatched PS5 version, which did hinder my overall enjoyment, and I'm acknowledging that may not be fair to the devs who have spoken out against this version. Maybe the Steam version added manual save options, I don't know. All I know is that the buggy unpatched PS5 version isn't all bad, because it means they never got rid of this handy little exploit where I can gain unlimited fish from cooking to sell for infinite money. Yes, hello, quaint little shopkeep. I'll take my hundreds of thousands of yen, please. Okay, so back when I was discussing Starstruck Vagabond, there was a certain game I said we should put a pin in. And now I guess we can go ahead and take that pin out, because it's time for Dungeons of Hinterberg, a game I'd admittedly never heard of until I saw Yahtzee's video on it, where, boy did he actually make quite a few Persona comparisons.
Or more informatively, a very Persona-y kind of way. It's that same Persona dual gameplay model where the two modes are separated but affect each other. So in summary, it's very much like Persona except with real-time instead of turn-based combat.
But that's perfectly fine, because it got me to look into the game, and the developers at Microbird Games told news site Game Developer that they were big fans of how the Persona games use a day-night cycle to let players explore urban Japan, and observed that no one had used that framework for a game set in Europe. On their Twitter, they said that Zelda was one of their many inspirations for Hinterberg, and invited people to guess others, to which they'd later reply with a "that is correct" gif to a user saying the game feels like Zelda with the structure and relationship system of Persona. So you play as Louisa, apparently a lawyer seeking vacation and adventure in the small quaint town of Hinterberg, known for their onion festival, local schnitzel, and interdimensional portals leading to complex sprawling labyrinthine dungeons full of monsters. They also have a movie theater. See, the basic premise of the game is that Hinterberg decided to turn these dungeons into a booming tourist trap and start selling vacation packages where you get to stay in town and buy weapons and potions from local businesses, complete with their own Hinterbucks to spend at these establishments.
It works just like regular money, but it's, fun.
Ultimately, Louisa vows to work her way through the game's 25 dungeons and fill out her little stamp booklet, like she's collecting autographs from former performing arts majors in costumes at Disney World. And I'm not gonna lie, I kinda just love that. Like, imagine if Ren had just told Mishima, hey, for $50 I'll bring you into the metaverse and you'll be able to hear my cat talk. It's a very funny but solid premise, and there's a good level of satire aimed at the idea of tourist traps and consumerism as a whole. Every day, Louisa wakes up and just decides where she wants to go for the day. There are 4 main regions to choose from that unlock as you progress through the story, each with their own distinct visual flair, unique dungeons, and scenic views where you can spend time just relaxing if you don't feel like adventuring that day. You start out in the gorgeous mountains of Doberkogel, there's also the lush, colorful forests of Hinterwald, and the also mountains of Kulmstein, but they're snowy mountains this time, and we can't ignore the toxic swamp of Brunelsumpf, also known as
Witch's Brew.
Then in the evening, you come back to town, get some shopping done, and raise another social stat or hang out with some of the folks around town, who basically serve as your confidants to keep the Persona 5 comparison going. And there's a nice selection of characters to hang out with who all provide their own thoughts and ideas on the current state of Hinterberg. You've got local rich kids like Taya dealing with the hassles of growing up in a tourist trap, fellow adventurers like Renault, the stoic but snack-sharing slayer wanting to conquer dungeons around the world, and tourists like Gertrude, who've been visiting Hinterberg for years and preferred things the way they were before all this dungeon tourism nonsense. Every character you hang out with has their own perspective and reason for being here, and I really liked getting to know these characters on a personal level. Also, there's a dog. If you just wanted to rush through the game, you could simply do one dungeon a day to min-max your vacation time, since the game ends when you fill out your stamp book. But it's a lot more rewarding and satisfying at the end to form those lasting friendships with people. So remember that you're on vacation, and take a little time to unwind and appreciate the things around you. Maxing out as many of these bonds as possible helps strengthen the ending when Louisa is saying her final farewells at the train station, akin to the denouement from recent Persona games. Also, much like Persona 5, there are benefits to spending more time with people, because most of these relationships unlock mechanical bonuses, like increasing your dodge stamina or getting discounts at some of the shops. The town, locales, and even the dungeons are all pretty gorgeous, and I regularly took time to stop and appreciate the scenery, and the dedication to the architecture and style of Hinterberg itself, which the devs have frequently said was based on a lot of real-world buildings to give it a nice sense of authenticity. The dungeons, as mentioned earlier, are very Zelda-esque for the most part. Each of the 4 regions gives Louisa different magical powers that more or less act like items from that series, like a weighted ball that you can blow up like a bomb, or a tornado that you can use to carry items, including yourself, to get over dangerous terrain or up onto certain ledges. I also really like this jelly cube that Louisa can create in the swamp zone, and when she gets rid of it, she does this sassy little snap, and look, that's sexy. These spells are often key to solving puzzles and making your way to the dungeon's exit portal, where there's usually a big fight and that sought-after stamp before you can leave. And while the story has this nice level of satire about tourist traps, many of the dungeons feel like they reference other types of games, like changing the perspective to become a side-scroller for a bit, and this one snowy dungeon with trippy perspectives that basically feels like a Super Mario Galaxy level, right down to the dungeon being called Glacial Galaxy. The monsters in Dungeons of Hinterberg are pretty interesting, with most of them being based on Austrian folklore, like kobolds and pitzels, and even the Wild Hunt, a name Megaten fans might be familiar with. But the game has this lore and explanation that none of the monsters are meant to be the literal mythological creatures, and that's why they're nearly all variations of shaped black goop wearing masks, and there's something about that I will admit I find both fascinating and a little disappointing at the same time. The combat in this game is perfectly fine, with light and heavy attacks, dodge rolls, special moves, and enough charms to provide passive buffs to help tailor your playstyle to suit your own preferences. I will admit though, I found it to be one of the weaker aspects of the title. You occasionally just get locked into arenas and fight off a few waves of enemies throughout the dungeons, and it all works well enough, nothing about it is bad, but once you get into the groove and find a system that works for you, it can eventually feel a little repetitive. I personally thought the best use of the combat was the game's handful of major bosses, and even then, those are mostly, again, Zelda-esque, as you have to use your magic to get them in a position where you can attack them, so they're more like puzzles rather than tests of your actual combat prowess. And what I mean by the combat being weaker is basically, every boss has a puzzle phase and a combat phase, and I'll say now that the puzzle parts were way more fun and memorable. Unfortunately, there's only one big boss fight per region, and I was pretty bummed out about that. I know it's a smaller game, and I was not expecting a unique and fleshed out boss for all 25 dungeons, but I personally would have been perfectly happy to have fewer dungeons in the game if it had meant more bosses. Overall, I really enjoyed Dungeons of Hinterberg. It's charming and funny and well written and beautiful and cozy and fun. The characters are engaging, no one element of the gameplay ever overstays its welcome, and they all mesh together really nicely to create a meaty experience with a lot to offer. Much like a real vacation, everyone who decides to spend time in Hinterberg is going to have their own method for checking out the sights and deciding how they want to spend their time. Maybe you'll reinvent yourself and buy some new clothes while you're away. Whatever helps you get the most out of your trip is entirely up to you. Oh yeah, and I should also probably mention this game has its own free DLC story, Episode Renault. Piggybacking off of the Persona comparisons, this is sort of like Episode Aegis, in the sense that it's considerably shorter, slightly more challenging, lacking in social elements, and of course being a story called Episode A Different Character. As the name suggests, we get to play as Renault in a short prequel story and have to seal 7 magical rifts that opened up. I enjoyed getting to see a bit more of Hinterberg and its lore and finding out that Renault f***ed the innkeeper. It helped flesh out some elements that got explored in the main story, and I appreciated this level of expansion, and I look forward to seeing what Microbird has planned for the future. Alrighty, and there you have it, the first 5 episodes of my indie games inspired by Megami Tensei series tossed into one big long compilation video. That's over 25 titles you just watched, and I've left links in the description to every single one of them. I hope these past 3 hours have been entertaining. If you enjoyed this compilation, let me know down in the comments. Which of these games looked the best to you? Have you played any of them for yourself? Feel free to share your thoughts, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future videos, indie-inspired Megaten games or otherwise. I love doing these videos, and trust me, I've got a lot more to talk about. I've already got games lined up for the next 3 entries in this series picked out, and that's not even including games that will come out between now and when those videos actually get made. I mean, like, come on, how have I not talked about Valhalla yet? I love that game. So, if you stuck around long enough that you're actually hearing all this, thank you so much for watching. As always, if you know of any other indie-inspired Megaten games, feel free to let me know about them in the comments. And if you're a developer working on one, definitely let me know about that. Thanks again for tuning in, and until next time, take care.